Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.
Do you confirm live, Chair?
Okay, thank you. Members and Tafalcha Rova Lig, you're all very welcome to this morning's meeting of the Committee for Communities. We do have quorum, and I now call the meeting to order, and this is the 82nd meeting of the Committee. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablets discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras and the sensitivity of microphones throughout the meeting. And for members joining via Zoom, can I ask you mindful of whether the camera on your device is able to pick up any background images or people that you may wish to not be seen or to blur. So agenda item 1, members, is declaration of interests. I remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Do members have any interest to declare in relation to any of today's agenda items? I would just like to declare that I'm bringing forward a members' bill on mitigating the threat of homelessness. I am also have a property from which I derive a rental income, and I'm a member of the Public Accounts Committee. I think might be relevant to one of the items coming up later. Andy?
Yeah, Chair, charity trustee, private sector landlord, trade union representative, and presently engaged with Workable through a member of my staff.
Thank you, Andy. I'm a charity trustee also. Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah, Melissa?
As for my just charity trustee as well.
Yes, thank you. Okay, members, moving on then to agenda item 3, Chairperson's business. Members, as I'm sure you're aware, the final stage of the Sign Language Bill took place in plenary on Tuesday this week. And just to inform members that I attended and spoke on behalf of the committee at the Minister's event following plenary, I'm sure you agree this bill is an important landmark for the deaf and deafblind community here, and I thank you all again for the help and support of the committee in its passage. I have to say, I think, clearly, obviously, the deaf community it's a momentous day for them, but I do also think there is huge learning for the future for us as an assembly, us as a committee, and us as legislators in terms of how I think it was part of why it was such a brilliant day here on Tuesday, that we saw a very good example of co-production and co-design. The community were involved, the community who were expert by experience as well as experts by training and academic experts were involved centrally from the very outset, were involved in the drafting of the bill, involved heavily in the committee stage. And I want to again thank the committee clerk and the team here for how they created an almost bespoke committee stage, which I think is an example to legislatures everywhere, and I do mean that sincerely. But I think that's a huge point of learning. It's about inclusion, respect, and working with the people for whom the legislation. And when we do that here as an assembly, I think that's us at our best, to be quite frank. And I also would say that will be key to the implementation and the successful delivery of the bill, is that be maintained throughout the course of all dealings with that community and with every other sector. That respect and that working with people pays dividends, and we should learn that lesson very firmly.
Just through the Chair, Chair, if you don't mind me just commenting on that, and I really do welcome the passage of this bill for the deaf community, but in particular, I welcome the understanding that the Assembly seem to display in terms of its understanding and importance of language as a means of communication, and embracing its culture as well too. And I only but hope that same understanding will be given to all languages, not just that of the deaf community, but particularly what I'm talking to here and alluding to is in fact what I often see as prejudice towards our own native language, the Irish language.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Anybody else want to sit? Pam?
Yeah, Chair, just to back up your comments, I think it was a momentous day, and it was really a very joyous day, and it lasted for hours and hours and hours, which was very, very unusual for this place, and I think it was a wonderful moment. So I'm looking forward to the outworkings, to the bill getting royal assent, and actually seeing that work really begin in earnest to ensure that provision is made to the deaf community. I mean, it just means so much. I have deaf constituents, and it's the difficulties for me even communicating with my own constituents, never mind looking at the difficulties that they actually have and are experiencing day and daily. So it's long before time, so very much welcome, and really glad to see this piece of legislation make its way successfully through this House.
Yeah, thank you. Kelly?
Just momentous occasion. The one thing I would say is, and everything has been wonderful, it really was, and the event the other night, it was beautiful to see so many signers in the Long Gallery together, and the joy was palpable. I just have a concern that there's an expectation that this committee will be continuing on work on the bill, and I just have a concern. There was a lot of people asking me about the way forward and how that's going to work. So while we have done our piece getting the bill to enact very shortly, whenever Charles gets back from America, hopefully he'll sign it off and it's an act of law. But I just have a concern that the expectation of the community is more and immediate, and I just hope that through the department, we can say, well, the work is about to start now. There's 5 years before the first report, because the expectation is that those action plans will be created very soon, and we're going to have an update on the budget. It's going to be a difficult one, but I think it's that expectations of what this committee will do, because when I spoke to a number of friends that were at the Long Gallery event, we must come up and see you again and come to committee and talk through this. So I think there's an expectation there.
Yeah, and I think you're right, that could be the case. And one thing that I think we should consider doing when it comes to that point is, so we have done a very fulsome report as well as the work. And I do want to thank all of the committee members. I think we did great work as a committee in strengthening the bill in conjunction with the department. But I think we should make it a very key feature of our legacy report that this is a very important bill that requires a committee keeping an eye on the progress of the implementation of the action plans and things like that. So I think that's one way in which we could try to ensure some input for a committee, for a succeeding committee. So I just think for when it comes to doing our own legacy report, I think we should be making that a very key feature of it. Okay, members, thank you. Just members also to say I've been invited to meet with departmental officials on Monday 11th of May in relation to the committee's response to the department and our work with local government in relation to anti-poverty strategy, and I'll provide an update to the committee following the meeting. The other thing I was considering asking colleagues then was whether or not any of you have experienced a rise in concern around the Motability scheme. I've been contacted by a number of people in relation to some of the issues with that. There's been changes to the changes, very uncertain as to where it's all at, very uncertain as to what consultation or process goes into making these changes. So I wonder, would members be agreed that we seek a briefing from Motability to see how that process has been done and where the changes have led and what's the assessment of the changes. Members content? Yeah, thank you. And also, members, I want to just note actually in relation to the Irish Cup final this weekend, and two of the committee members I think are represented in it. I see Coleraine and Dungannon Swifts are in it for the second year in a row, following their first win last year, which was quite historic. So to wish both teams well, but also just to say that I do hope that Dungannon Swifts can do a double, and that also then draws my attention to the fact that Tyrone under-20s last night just did a very memorable and historic treble in terms of Ulster, and keeping alive potential for, what is it in terms of All-Ireland, the potential?
Let's see, All-Irelands in a row, but they also have been, they've achieved 4 Ulsters in this last 5 years. Yeah,
and potential have succeeded in the 3rd Ulster in a row, and potentially 3rd All-Ireland is still in the possibility. So to acknowledge that.
And just on that, Chair, as well, I'd like to wish the 2 soccer teams all the best, and I hope that Morris has no difficulty in actually accessing the game as well, whenever it comes up. I'm sure if anyone reads Irish news today, they'll see the story there. Okay, so finally then, members, I just want to inform you about the management of a number of the agenda items in today's meeting. The committee team received a request from the department to reorder the briefing on today's agenda, which are coming from officials. Unfortunately, the committee diary doesn't allow for agenda items to be reordered after the issue of the main pack. Therefore, the meeting pack order will differ from the order numbers that we're going to be going through the briefings today, and that's for agenda items 5 and 7. But I'll try to keep you right on page numbers, but it will be maybe a wee bit just more difficult for members to navigate, but we'll bear with it. Also, I overlooked item 2 on my way past there, which is apologies. Are members aware of any apologies? Claire? No. Okay, thank you. So agenda item 4 then is draft minutes, members, and they're contained at page 7 of your pack. Do members have any edits or amendments to the draft minutes? No. Are members then content to agree the minutes of 23rd April as drafted to be signed by me on behalf of the committee? Yep, thank you. Okay, members, so we're moving on then to the first of our agenda, first of our briefings, which is agenda item 5. The briefing paper for this agenda item, it's from the Employment Support Scheme, and it's an oral briefing this morning from the Department for Communities. The briefing paper for the agenda item is at page 22 of the meeting pack and was previously agenda item 7. Can I now welcome the following officials to the meeting? We have Michelle Furphy, who is Director of the Labour Market Policy and Delivery, and Shauna Robinson, and Shauna is Head of Health and Work Support Branch. So Michelle, I think it's yourself who's going to make an opening statement, and then we'll get to questions from members. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just get my file the right way up. It's always going to be a good start, isn't it?
100%.
And here I start with the glasses on, glasses off. Good morning, committee members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to brief and update you all on the Employment Support Scheme. As been introduced, I'm Michelle Furphy. I'm Acting Director for Labour Market Policy and Delivery. Shauna here is the head of our Health and Work Support Branch, so that delivers and manages all our health and work programmes, one of which is the Employment Support Scheme. Firstly, can I thank you, committee members, for agreeing to defer this oral briefing from the 5th of February 2026 when you had originally requested this, because it has allowed us to be able to give you a more meaningful update on the forward approach for the scheme. I'm conscious we've provided a written briefing in advance of today's session. I don't wish to duplicate that information, but with your permission I'll briefly summarise the key points. So in terms of the support scheme itself, it was introduced in Northern Ireland back in 1981. and it was about providing a wage subsidy and support to people who experience barriers to employment due to the severity of their disability. That wage subsidy is based on an assessment of the client output, or sort of a measure of their productivity, if you like, in their specific job role, and that is then split into a contribution from the department and from the employer. The scheme was closed to new entrants in September 2006, so almost 20 years ago. We no longer hold records on how many people were on the scheme at that time of closure in September, but we do know that in May 2008, so about 20 months later, there were 811 on the scheme. That number has since dropped to the figure today of 230. Your briefing pack actually has it as 232. We've had 2 subsequent leavers from that scheme since the update was provided to you. As you're aware, the Department undertook an EQIA consultation related to potentially ceasing funding for this scheme in November 2024. That work and that consultation was really prompted by concerns over the scheme and how it hadn't kept pace with modern employment policy for disabled people, and an element of the potential for the scheme to trap people in their current job and prevent progression. We received 136 responses to that consultation, which were overwhelmingly not in support of the proposal to cease funding. So following the consultation process, we have been considering those responses provided, and we've undertaken a very comprehensive review of the scheme itself, including a full appraisal for its future delivery. Apologies, I've had a cold the last couple of days. So that review has considered the scheme's effectiveness. It's looked at value for money, but I have to emphasise value for money is only one aspect of it. It's very much looking at the alignment with the wider labour market policy and the potential impacts on current participants and their employers should funding cease. On the basis of that appraisal, then Minister Lyons has approved a recommendation that will see funding for the employment support scheme continue, and that will be accompanied by an engagement plan with existing participants, with their employers, and that will focus on trying to identify opportunities to support progression into unsubsidised employment where that suits and where that is possible for the participants. We have developed a forward work plan then to advance this recommendation, and we're about to begin a programme of engagement with participants and with the employers. We will also then be bringing forward a consultation report on the EQIA to publish in the coming months. In concluding then, the EQIA consultation was sort of the first mechanism, I suppose, to engage with the public on the employment support scheme and understand the potential equality implications of ceasing its funding. We've reviewed the evidence provided in response to the consultation and the potential impacts, and we are fully aware that given the additional barriers faced by disabled people in the labour market, as well as the challenges facing many of our employers, which I think is important to note, that the loss of the financial support could undermine job security and potentially lead to loss of jobs amongst a particularly vulnerable group. These impacts would directly conflict with the Minister's priority of supporting more disabled people and people with health conditions to move closer into and progress in employment. So the Department will continue support under this scheme, but simultaneously we will be exploring opportunities to support participants to progress in work and to move on to unsubsidised employment if that is right for them. Thank you, Chair, and we're happy to take any questions that members might have.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's important that we continue to support people, especially people who need that bit of additional support, to allow them to take fully part to the maximum potential they have in all of the normal activities of our society. So I think it is really useful in that regard. I know it's not directly related, but it might fall under your purview. But I think it will come up at a later stage in committee. But even the decision not to continue the right to try feels almost related. I know it's probably a different scheme, but can I ask, in terms of practical terms, how will this proposed engagement move participants into unsubsidised employment, and what measurable targets or timelines will be used to assess the success of the scheme?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to say that whilst on the face of it the scheme seems relatively straightforward in that it's a wage subsidy, it's actually, when you get into the detail of it, quite a complicated scheme, and it's quite individualised. There's a lot of intricacies. So I think we are in a better position now because we have 230 participants, and it is almost going to be 230 different approaches. It will have to be very individualised. We will be working through with the support organisations. So we have USL, Ulster Support Employment Limited, and Disability Organisation, or Disability Action, are two organisations who help in managing this scheme and in liaising with the participants. So our intention would be to work with those support organisations and the participants and their employers. It's sort of a four-way course of action, but the monitoring and the targets will obviously be moving on to that subsidised employment or unsubsidised employment. We have information, we gather that routinely because people do naturally move off. A number of them have moved off onto unsubsidised employment over the last 5 years. I think we've had 40. So we will continue that sort of tracking and making sure that we know reasons why people move off. Again, we have all of that as a matter of routine.
Do you see any of this cohort? And I have to say, I thought 136 responses to consultation was high, given it's a pretty narrow focus. So I think that's significant in itself. Will any of these cohorts transfer into workable? Is that part of some of those 232 plans, or a template in general that a lot of? Do you see a lot of people moving across that?
Yeah, for those who have moved off quite recently, some have availed of the workable support, and that will be part of the departmental offer, if that is right for that person, that the workable support will be available for them. And to note, USL and Disability Action are also workable providers, so it will be a seamless transition for them, if that's right for the person.
Yeah, it's probably just worth adding to that Workable was the successor to Employment Support Scheme because it was more designed for that whole progression route as employment policy for disabled people has moved forward. And as Shauna said, a fairly significant chunk of people who have moved on to unsubsidised employment are availing of workable. We also have some of our ES participants now availing of access to work. And that's what we need to make sure that our employers and the participants know, that there is a range of support there, that it's not about just going on to unsubsidised employment and you're left to your own devices. We have other supports there, and we need to make sure that people know about those, because we know about them. Do people out there? No, they definitely don't always.
Yeah, and that funny is one of the things that occurs to me as we're speaking. So somebody that moves into unsubsidised employment, how are we tracking that works out or doesn't? Say if that falls apart within 3 or 6 months, is the person left then unsupported? Is there a re-entry system, or what sort of monitoring are you going to do that new employment is working out and is successful in meeting the needs of the person?
Yeah, so if somebody moves off employment support scheme, there's no possibility to come back. Obviously it's a closed scheme, there's no re-entry to employment support. If they move off and at the point of moving it's been identified that they need additional support through the likes of Workable, that will be there, and obviously we track through our Workable participants and anybody who's availing of access to work, or indeed the condition management programme, which also might be an option for some of these participants. We will track all of those. The challenge would be if someone moves off and it hadn't been identified at that point in time that they needed some of this support. Mm-hmm. But part of what we are trying to do in general across the entire area of labour market policy and the development of disability and work strategy and policy is to have more and more engagement with employers and get employers more informed about what supports are there, because often the employer is the one who's identifying the need and they need to know to come to us then for the support.
Okay, final one for me before I go then to members for now is around the EQAA. When will you publish the EQAA consultation and set out a clear long-term decision on the scheme's future beyond the current continuation approach?
Yeah. So now that we have the very clear way forward, the agreed approach in terms of our recommendation, we are working to publish that consultation within the next 2 months. Yep. Shauna, yes.
Yep. And will be in all formats of accessibility for everyone to see when it's published. Yep. Okay.
And the other one then, just finally is around the recent ending of the Local Growth Fund. USIL and those support groups, what's your assessment of the impact that there has been on those groups and their ability to continue providing support?
Yeah, so I'm aware that committee has asked us for an assessment in general in terms of local growth and the department's ability to achieve its objectives, and then specifically on the impact for people with disabilities. So there's somebody else, it's not in Shauna's area, but somebody else in my team is working on that assessment for committee at the minute. The allocations to local growth have just been very recently confirmed. The money hasn't issued yet. My understanding is it will issue to the organisations in the next couple of weeks, by mid-May. So we have a range of information received from MHCLG to enable us to do that assessment for you. We have some information from some of the organisations. I've been out in a couple of different other aspects of my role. I've been out engaging with a number of the organisations and trying to work out, how we make sure across, one of my other areas is the jobs and benefits offices. I'm responsible for that network. And we spent a lot of time over the last few years building up relationships with all of those organisations and referral pathways. And I'm really keen that we don't lose that and that we make sure that we're availing of all supports that are available out there, whether that's, through local growth, obviously at the much reduced level, or Department for Economy schemes or shared island funding, or wherever the source is. We need to know about it, we need the organisations to know about it, and we need to be making sure that the people who need the support are getting it. So the assessment, in conclusion, the assessment is ongoing. I would hope now that we have the allocations finished that we would have that assessment ready within the next 3 to 4 weeks to come back to committee, and I'd be happy to do a written or an oral briefing on that when it's complete.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go now to Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you very much. Relief when the ministers agreed to continue this. I just wondered, as the scheme closed to new applicants in 2006, it means that the remaining 230 people have been in receipt of this support for over 20 years. I was just wondering, can you confirm programmes like Workable, how long do they last?
So Workable isn't time-bound, it's very individualised. Shauna, do you want to give more detail?
It's on the personal needs, but if you mean overarching funding, it's by our governance of business cases and subject to that and approval. But someone's support in Workable is what they need it for, and that will be determined by them and one of our 3 providers. So it's not limited to an X amount of weeks. It's reviewed periodically just to make sure everyone's getting their need, the employers getting their support and the employees getting their support through the Workable programme, and we just do some tracking of that, but it can be for as long as someone needs it. Yep.
Okay. It's just because I had been an employer who used Workable in the past, and it was very much a 3-month type scheme, so that's different now. Okay,
yeah.
That's good to hear, because I'm just worried that somebody...
It might be a review point that they may be referring to, but no, someone can be on Workable for what their needs are for, whenever they need it for. Yep.
The current employment support scheme, does that pay part of the salary?
Yes.
And also provides then support in work?
Yes.
So it's both of that?
Yes.
Okay, no problem. Have any employers said in the investigation work that they couldn't afford to have the person in place unless that employment salary, the support was removed?
Yeah.
Yes.
We know that our providers in their liaison with the employers, it's probably right to say that we have quite a large number of small employers with participants on employment support scheme, and we know that probably more than half of those employers have indicated that they would not be able to retain the person without the subsidy from employment support.
Disappointing, because it sort of means I've only got you because I'm getting part of your salary, but that's what I'm worried about when it comes to when people are moving over to unsubsidised employment. It may not be then with that existing employer, even though it's been over 20 years. I'm assuming most of them have been with the same employer over 20 years, but I'm just wondering, has the department had any indication of a target of when these remaining people will need to have moved over, or have been encouraged, or their employer have been encouraged to take up the salary cost themselves?
No, there's no target as such, with the decision that Minister has taken, subject to ongoing normal financial governance and business case approvals, etc. The support through this scheme will continue. However, we will be working actively with the employers to try to move people. Then there is the wider disability and work strategy, and the work that we are doing just across the board. And there are some fantastic employers out there, who are really, really, really open to engaging with people with disabilities and health conditions. And what we want to make sure is that this scheme is not trapping people in a job where they're not able to progress. And it could be that they move completely off it and out from that job and with a different employer, if that's what's right for them. But that's where I suppose it goes back to, it's nearly 230 different actions that we need to take.
And I'm sure the move off reasons are general, but I can imagine some of them would be people have reached retirement age, or hopefully not, but maybe their condition has deteriorated. But I'm just wondering, the money then, so the money that has been attached to those 230 people, does it move with the people? So for instance, will any money be transferred over to another employment scheme rather than just going back into the pot? I'm just thinking of Useful and Disability Action, if they're looking at unsubsidised employment opportunities for this this cohort of people, will the money that stops being paid through the employment support scheme then move into the other scheme?
So it wouldn't be as direct as that, Kelly, but very much so what we would be wanting to happen is, this is costing something like 2.7 million in comparison with similar spend on access to work or workable. And we would be making the case that if the cost of the employment scheme reduced by 1 million, for example, that we would be bidding into the department to increase the budgets for those other programmes accordingly.
It was just, I know we've had papers about the budget coming forward and the decision taken not to move forward with some of the assistance into work has me concerned if we're reducing this budget. If there isn't already an internal understanding, actually what we're doing is we're moving people out of A into B, while their employer will certainly have cost, there may still be workable or other supports that will need to come with, to go with that person to enable them to stay in work. I think it's just, I'm concerned that 2 point whatever millions it said there, that it'll just whittle down and it's money lost out of disability employment support.
It's very much not what we want to happen, and right across our group, our Deputy Secretary would be in the same sort of space, that this is about using that money better to support people with disabilities in employments, not for something else.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Melissa, go ahead.
Thank you, you're very welcome today again. Just on the same point, does the actual subsidy remain with the employer or with the individual?
So it's associated with the individual. Shauna.
It's paid to an employer for the individual in that post.
So, in fact, let's say if a person chooses then to move to a different employer,
that would be ending. That would be exiting the scheme.
So that by going to another employer, so if they got to that stage that they had developed skills and so on that they could aspire to, say, a different post, they lose the support should they leave the scheme.
And that's one of the biggest drivers for our proposals, our original proposals, to change this, because That's what we mean by potentially trapping people in their job.
Actually, that's what I was actually thinking as well too. If a person was totally dissatisfied with it, with a particular location,
yeah, progression possibly for some, maybe not for all, but for some. But yes, the subsidies is with the employer as a contribution.
Right. Okay. And just then to on that, in relation to, we'll say, the likes of Adapt NI and so on, or other disability groups, have you had much consultation with them? With regards to the future of the scheme and that?
Not with
them direct now, unless they give an answer through the public consultation, which would have to go back and check. Right. But we had responses from both USL and DA on the EQIA response, because they are the two providers. But I don't think there was but I can check for you. I just don't have that to hand.
Right.
All right.
Chair.
Thanks, Marlisa. Andy, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just thinking on that point there, where the department has a concern around trapping progression outside of the employer that's supported through the subsidy. What if a progression opportunity does arise, but the subsidy is required to move on for progression outside of that employer? Has the department done any analysis of that?
That's part of what we will be looking at, is to try to see where we can do that, and whether it's with the same employer or with a different employer. We can't, within the confines of the employment support scheme as it currently stands, move the subsidy. As soon as the person's job changes, whether it's with their employer, the existing employer, or with a different employer, the format of the scheme doesn't permit a subsidy going with them. In terms of wage subsidies, it's a difficult area, because I know that a lot of disability support organisations would not be in favour of wage subsidies. You alluded to it yourself earlier, Kelly, but it was also recognised in the consultation responses that there sometimes is a time and a place. We have things like Job Start, which is a wage subsidy, but it's a time-bound wage subsidy. I think that's the sort of space that we need to be moving more into, that it's not something that is as open-ended as employment support has been, but that's where we very much need to work through on an individual basis what our options might be, and unfortunately what our budget might be, to enable us to have something else to put them onto with some sort of financial support.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of that wider context, and see in terms of Workable and the other employment supports that are offered. You'd mentioned in your overview around how we better communicate and get that wider understanding as to what's available, and how it can importantly support the individual, perhaps the employer if the employer needs that support for the individual, and the wider integration. How is the department taking that forward through that interaction engagement? Because there are quite a number of people that I still do come across that aren't aware of the various schemes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, lots and lots of different ways in which we're trying to do it. So again, across the jobs and benefits offices, I have an employer services team. So at a local level, we have employer advisors who link with smaller local employers, and then we have client executives who link with the bigger employers, and we are delivering training to all of those interactive staff to enhance their knowledge of the schemes and ensure that at every point of contact they have with an employer that they are mentioning it. I think what we find is that an employer doesn't know what to ask. They don't know what they don't know, and in our engagement with them, it doesn't necessarily come up because they don't need it to come up. So what I am very keen to do is make sure that this is almost a standard script, that at every engagement we are reminding employers about those sorts of supports. We also then have engagement through the Keep Britain Working review that was led by Sir Charlie Mayfield. There's a lot of interaction with employers going forward with that. And again, it's all of the opportunities is highlighting and repeatedly highlighting these supports, because I say if you don't use it, you lose it. If you heard about it 6 months ago but didn't need it, you don't retain it. So I think it has to be just a standard script.
And how are you ensuring that the person with a disability that is maybe perhaps going for a job interview all the responsibility isn't on them to sell it to the employer. Is there any information that perhaps can be disseminated out there to employers? I know you're saying you're doing that through the JBOs and that wider outreach, but to be honest, I'm not seeing it substantially, and I feel there's too much of an emphasis and onus on the disabled person to promote and sell it to the employer. There shouldn't be a sale, but I think that often is the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to look at what more we can do, and it definitely, I hear what you're saying, but you're not seeing it at the minute. We have undertaken an exercise across all of those employer engagement staff who have said they have a training need. They need us to give them more information about it, and that's the bit that we're taking forward at the minute. So I would hope that you will see a difference in the coming months, Andy, that out there you will see it happening more. I think communication is a huge piece, and ensuring that people do know what's out there. I think a lot of this will potentially be taken up by the Disability and Work Strategy, which isn't my area anymore, but that's a key part of it. Obviously, that strategy is subject to budget. The consultation responses are being analysed, the strategy is being impacted. I know the team intend to bring the disability sector back again to give them an update on the feedback and how it has impacted on the strategy. And I would be hopeful that once that strategy, if that strategy does secure the funding, that it will pick up a lot of these communication pieces as well.
Okay, appreciate that. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you. I think you're right. Before I come to Kelly, I think you're right in general sense. I mean, we often talk about what that I think is wrongly framed as economic inactivity. It's actually often an economic disadvantage. But we claim to have a focus on that, yet we don't do some of these very simple things a bit better. And sometimes it's even just down to reasonable adjustment. I remember, ironically enough, today speaking to someone in my early days as an MLA around someone with hearing issues just simply being provided with a working space that wasn't in an open plan. Some of these things can be really fundamental. Some of them really basic and structural around transport and accessibility. But there are a cohort of very able people out there willing and wanting to participate in work, but they are being shut out. It's not that they're not engaging, they're being shut out for various reasons. So I think it's important that we get this part right and we continue to see improvements in this. Kelly?
I was just picking up on a point that Andy had made. I have been involved with working with people with disabilities for donkey's years, and we can look at it from the person with the disabilities point of view, which of course is right, but when you start to look at what the employers look at, a JBO is not somewhere that an employer goes to first. I'm just wondering, has there been any discussion with Economy about NI business? Because that's where a lot of businesses get their information from. And even going forward, if there would be a joint bid between yourselves and the Department of the Economy for money to make sure that businesses know, because quite often someone could put down in a job application form, do they consider themselves to have a disability? It doesn't go into an awful lot more. And if the person is qualified enough and experienced enough and they get that job, it's only after they go into the position that then somebody goes, oh, right, okay, we need to get this sorted out. Unfortunately, that's the way it happens. It's retrospective as opposed to being proactively there. But many small or SMEs don't have HR. So it'll be up to somebody, a secretary in an office somewhere, to try and find this out. But most of the time they go to NI business. And it's the same with the community and voluntary sector. They'll go to NICFA. There'll be trade bodies that help with that. I'm just thinking, can there be a consideration then of a joint bid with to make sure that all businesses, whether or not they have come to looking for help, but businesses who don't even know to look for help, that they're aware of that? Because I found NI business is the one that tells everybody about HMRC and pay scales and COVID rules when it was then. Lots of information goes through that. It would be interesting to see if that could work out. I know we have a copy of the Minister for Finance's guidance on joint bids. It would be lovely to see that joining up of both, because people with disabilities, while they're coming in under communities, they're actually part of the economy as well.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier about the Keep Britain Working review, and that's very much about supporting people with disabilities and health conditions either get into employment or stay in employment if you're quite right, Kelly, that quite often the disability or the health condition only really becomes apparent after a short period of time that the person, or a longer period of time that the person is in employment. We see that ourselves in our own, employment sort of space. We work very closely with the Department for Economy. There is a new director in Department for Economy there who has responsibility for inclusion. The Department for Economy are working jointly with us on the Keep Britain Working review, and we are constantly talking about what the best mechanism is for communicating out to employers, because again, you're quite right, NI Business Info, we find that a lot of employers don't use that. Some do. There's lots of different mechanisms here. We have Federation for Small Business, we have the CBIs, we have all of the chambers. We have lots of different channels, and we need to use all of those channels. But absolutely, we're working as closely as we can. Not directly in terms of a bid at this stage, happy to look at that, but in terms of how we are working and trying to ensure that communications are joined up, we're absolutely doing that already.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, you had mentioned as part of your one of the answers around the Ministry for Housing and Local Government, we're going to be doing something in May, an announcement, or can you give me some more detail on that, please?
So that's the allocations, the Local Growth Fund allocations for this year. So the reduction, Chair, every organisation was asked to, sort of submit their proposals for the 26-27 year at that 64% reduction. So those allocations have now been confirmed, and the money will issue to the organisations in mid-May from MHCRG.
And give you some detail around what those allocations are?
I can certainly ask. I don't have, I have that as part of the assessment. I'm assuming DOF, Department of Finance, or NIO MHCLG will be making some sort of announcement, but I'm very happy to go back and confirm that, Chair, and come back and let you know what the communication piece is around that. I know the organisations themselves know what their allocation will be, and they know that they'll be getting the money in mid-May. That has been communicated to them directly already.
Okay, thank you for your attendance, both of you today, Michelle and Shauna. It's a very important piece of work, I have to say, and I think one that committee are keen to ensure that support continues to increase, and people are continue to be provided with the support. So, we look forward to seeing further improvements to the disability and work strategy, as you have touched upon there. But thank you for your attendance today. Appreciate it. Okay, members, any actions emerging out of that session that members want to note for follow-up, or any further actions, or content for now? Yes, Andy?
Is it maybe in order, Chair, to write to the providers, just to ask them for at this stage maybe a written briefing as to their views on the scheme, how it's operating, the positive impacts it's having, or where they maybe feel it can be strengthened?
Members content? Yeah. We do that, yeah. Okay, thank you, members. So, members, we're a little ahead of time now, so if you would be content, we could move to agenda item 8, which is our consideration of the Criminal Justice Bill and the response from this committee to the Committee for Justice, if members are content. So, you'll recall, members, at our meeting on the 16th of April, we considered correspondence from the Committee for Justice seeking views from Assembly statutory committees on the Criminal Justice, Sentencing, etc. bill on its call for evidence. At this meeting, we agreed that the committee team draft a response for committee agreement. The draft response can be found at page 27 of your meeting pack. Do members have any comments or suggestions they'd like to make in relation to that response? Are members otherwise content that the response is submitted then to the Committee for Justice? Yep, thank you. And if members are content, then we could maybe continue with agenda item 9, matters arising. So, members, you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 33. We only have a few responses to consider this week, and I'll ask for comments on each as I go through, and it's taken us from 9.2 to 9.4. So, agenda item 9.2 is a response from the committee to the Executive Office Committee with any information from the Department for Communities in relation to the draft Irish Language Strategy and draft Ulster Scots Strategy. Do members have any comments or any views, issues they'd like to raise? I actually think we had talked about this before, but I actually think it would be worthwhile getting in both of the commissioners' probably separately, given that they have such different strategies in front of them. But I know there have been concerns raised. I think it'd be worthwhile hearing from them potentially on the same day, but in separate sections. If members are content, we'd seek a briefing.
Great.
Sian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Would totally agree to get them in for briefings. I think that would be really useful. I think there is a bit of an issue when we look at the budget in terms of what was in the 2023 business case. You know, it is, I think the way it was worded was notably below the levels. And that budget uncertainty is particularly difficult for new public organisations. So, you know, we can't just produce strategies on paper without ensuring that the bodies that are tasked with the delivery of those papers don't have the resources to fulfil their roles. The other point I just want to make is that, you know, when we look at that activity of the commissioners, you know, looking at the Office of Identity, Cultural Expression, you know, 65 in-person meetings, they've held public-facing events, they've engaged with political leaders, departments. I just think that it makes the responses that we have had from the department, they're quite stark in comparison in terms of the movement forward. When we look at the engagement that both commissioners have also had in terms of the Ulster Scots and Ulster British Commissioner and the Commissioner for Irish Language, I just think that there seems to be a real disconnect here in terms of the department that is actually setting the policy and waiting for these language policies that we have been asking for a long time, and the commissioners that are engaged. And it would just, I suppose it's something that we can bring up with our meeting with the minister when he comes before us in, I think it's in June. We desperately need updates from the department and what they're doing on particularly the Irish language strategy. I think that is imperative at this point when we have a commissioner that's out there doing that work without any policy underpinning. So those are my two main comments. It's just a real concern about the budget and then a concern just about the level of activity that is happening on the commissioner side of things without any policy underpinning from the department.
Yep, thank you, Sian. Okay, Clerk, you're content with
the action there is to invite both commissioners in for briefing. Yeah.
Yep. And that's both separately but linked. Item 9.3 is from the Minister of Finance in relation to the committee's request for updated March 2026 guidance on pooled budgets. Do members have any comments or views? Go ahead, Kelly.
Just going to say I'd like to see a bit more proactivity because Department for Communities just is intrinsically linked to so many other departments. It's a bit like after the sign language bill has gone through, the other departments will be doing action plans. You would love to see more cross-departmental planning and budgeting, you know, and it's there.
Yeah, that struck me as well. Like the facility is there, it's just not being used, and there are. And I mean, as a member of the PSE, we very frequently come across these cross-departmental, cross-government issues where that siloed working is restricting huge strides forward, I would have to say, in terms of, we talk about transformation all the time. I think that in itself would be transformative if we saw a more collective approach to some of these issues. And this department does cross-cut an awful lot.
If you think about the issues that we have with the lack of land planning, many things to do with housing, or you know, you consider disability and employment, and you consider there's just communities isn't a thing on its own. Yeah. It needs that work from others, and I think, to be honest, the best way to do it is to look at the money, because if more departments, we had a meeting with homelessness groups and departments to see education, health, communities, what all was being done to alleviate homelessness. Very good work. Not one penny was being shared. You know, and it just means then that silo, there could be efficiency savings, I think, achieved.
I fully agree with that. I have to say it's a great resource. Go ahead, Sian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good to see this coming forward. I think the guidance is potentially quite important, but again, and something that we've said so often, and Kelly's just reiterated there, you know, communities don't exist in silos and they don't exist just in one department. My concern is that it just doesn't have teeth. We are not mandating any department to actually work together. And I think that is the biggest flaw in this. We are relying on goodwill across departments, and I don't think that it will be effective. In departments, there is a real culture shift, and that may need to come from a mandating. I am wondering, Chair, and you may know this with your other hat on in terms of a member of the PAC, is this something that the PAC could look into? Could we ask that the PAC look into in terms of how or whether it could actually work in terms of mandating departments to work together to pool budgets, and how is there any mechanism whatsoever that can really push for departments to work together for the good of a joint outcome?
Yeah, no, and I'd certainly raise it. I mean, that committee as a standing committee does operate in a particular way in that it reacts to reports from the but I think given the amount of overlap we have found and the difficulties that presents, I think this as a part of that solution should be woven into the work of the PAC. So I will certainly raise that. It is relevant.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members, item 9.4 then, the last item in Matters Rising, is a response from the Scottish Parliament Social Justice and Social Security Committee advising that it has not considered the implications for Scotland of the UK Pension Schemes Bill, but has supplied a copy of a legislative consent memorandum lodged in September 2025, which was considered by the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee, and that's in there for members' information. Do members wish to make any comment or thoughts on that issue? Content? Okay, members, that concludes Matters Arising then for today. So now I think we're able to move back to our agenda item, and this is agenda item 8, I believe, is it? 6, yeah. So, members, we're moving then to our departmental quarterly update, and this is an oral briefing from the Permanent Secretary and senior officials. So members will recall that this was scheduled with the Permanent Secretary in light of the Minister not being able to attend the briefing as previously arranged. And just to say, we do always provide the Minister and the Department with 2 options on that to try to ensure that we can work around executive meetings. So just to put that on the record. Hi, Grainia. So members, there is no briefing paper for the agenda item today. The topics suggested at last week's meeting for discussion were shared, and further topics were shared with the department following our meeting and throughout the course of the week. However, that does not prevent members asking any other questions they may have in relation to our topics. So I'd now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting, and I'm delighted to welcome for the first time as Permanent Secretary, no stranger to the committee by any means, in your previous role as Housing Executive, Chief Executive, but now Permanent Secretary of the Department for Communities, and to Fáilte Rót, Grainia and Almore. Good luck in this, which is another significant role, and we as a committee look forward to working with you and working closely with you in relation to how we can work together in what is a very important department. So thank you and welcome. And we're also welcomed by joined by John Greer. Again, no stranger, has been in recent times. John is the Deputy Secretary in the Corporate Services branch, and John will be staying on for the financial briefing, which we're taking later. So Grainia, you're very welcome. We know you haven't been in the post long. You're standing in for the Minister today. Can I ask if you want to make an opening statement first, and then we'll move to members from questions from members?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. And yes, lots of familiar faces in the room, so thank you in advance. Yes, so this is week 3, and I've been made very welcome in the department, I have to say. And obviously, as you said, given my previous role in the Housing Executive, it's a department that I'm familiar with. Obviously, housing, a hugely important aspect of the department, but obviously the wide brief of the department stretching across communities more broadly, employability, local government, and culture. So huge brief, and absolutely a privilege to be in the role. As it goes without saying, to Chair and to the entire committee, at your service as the Permanent Secretary, very keen, obviously at your disposal as and when you need either myself or my colleagues, both either in person here or indeed information to you. And as I say, when you come in new to an organisation as an accounting officer, it's really, really important that I ask the questions around what are we doing well, what are we doing less well, what can we improve. So I've no, you can rest assured anything that you want to raise with me either today or in the future, as I say, rightly so, at your disposal. I think the other thing maybe just to mention, and I'll stop there, is the other key point for me coming in as an accounting officer is always to ask the big strategic questions, and some of the really big strategic questions for me coming into the department, and I know lots of people are asking, and rightly so, about resources, and you'll come on to that, but I think even in advance of that, the obvious challenges are the scale and extent of the need for public services, and the changing profile of the people that we serve, both in terms of their need. There are a number of really, really acute points that is front of mind for me and for my colleagues across the senior team. First of all, very, very high levels of households, numbers of households in Northern Ireland with life-limiting conditions and disabilities. And those households are the people that we serve, and those are households that we need to continue to find sustainable solutions for. And the other is the fact that in this decade we will have more people above retirement age than we will have young people. And while it is wonderful that people are living longer, and it is testimony to the fact that we have had over many decades improved health outcomes, nevertheless there are both economic and social and really, really significant impacts for that. So look, I've just mentioned those two. When you come in new to post, it's really important that I don't go straight down into the weeds, and that we keep our focus on what are the big strategic priorities, and I'm sure we'll talk at length over the weeks and months and years to come. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Grainia, and I suppose that is a good lead into my first couple of questions, and then I'll come to members. So, first area I want to look at is around homelessness and the disappointing, I think, response in relation to that there isn't within this mandate likely now to be a duty to prevent homelessness. Why has that decision been taken, given that's a massive crisis and a rising crisis? What's the logic for not making that a...
Yes, so I suppose first and foremost, I think what's been very, very important has been the fact that the homelessness strategy did attempt in its publication a number of years ago, and was very, very clear that we needed to see a strategic shift in terms of prevention. So from a strategic point of view, that was the intent. I've been in this committee in my previous role, and I won't rehearse this to explain why the impact of the pandemic took so much focus on resources, and we went from, we've all said it many, many times, a focus that really wanted to really get as many resources towards prevention. When the pandemic hit, we had to go into response mode, and since then we've seen growing numbers, really, really growing numbers in temporary accommodation. I think what was very, very helpful about the focus of the Northern Ireland Audit Office in the last year, and of course we had our Public Accounts Committee hearings and the report coming forward, was there is absolute agreement on both the value of preventative approaches and the benefit of preventative approaches. And so what I would like to see is, and what I've already commenced, and my colleagues had this underway since the Audit Office report, is the scoping work that's required to understand what would either legislative change, strategic change, and then resource practical change look like. How do we do that? How quickly can we do that? I've actually got a couple of meetings coming up in the not too distant future, in the next week or two, to understand how far that's advanced. I'm very happy to come back to committee and give you that undertaking and give you more detail on that, or indeed to write to you, Chair. But rest assured, the exploratory work on what would a prevention duty look like, how would it work, what can we learn from other jurisdictions where they've gone ahead and they've actually learned things that they've now said might do that differently at a point in the future. And so I've asked for a critical path in relation to that, and I'll be able to update the committee. So as I say, that is, NIAO have been very clear, Public Accounts Committee have been very clear, and the department has been positive in its response to say we need to do that. In a practical sense, just finding legislative time for that in this mandate wouldn't have been possible, but that does not in any way stop the strategic focus, and very, very importantly, funding was ring-fenced for prevention in the last financial year. Obviously, without a budget, it wasn't possible to allocate beyond the first quarter, but I was really, really pleased to see, as I left the Housing Executive come into this role, that where the Minister was able to ring-fence, at least in the interim allocation, he's done that, so that bodes well, I think, for this coming year. All of that said, with the massive caveat, without a budget, we can guarantee no more than that.
Okay, thank you, and I absolutely agree. We have to move more to the prevention space, and in fact I have declared the interest that I am developing and have with the Speaker a members' bill in relation to increasing the amount of time within which people can get support from the executive. One of the key measures that the Minister has cited in relation to saving on the budget so we can get more into prevention, I presume, is around the reduction of temporary accommodation bills. Part of that was an allocation to purchase 600 homes. That seems to be mired in delay with not a single one of those homes yet purchased. What is the reason behind that delay? Well, the reason appears to be Treasury have concerns around it. Why were those concerns not bottomed out with Treasury prior to announcing this scheme and an understanding of what it would take to meet the Treasury's requirements?
It's an excellent question, and I suppose I need to be very clear here. Having been the accounting officer in the housing executive and put the business case together to the department, the clarity that was required from the housing executive was it would invest from its own reserves. And that's a very, very important point in order to purchase those homes initially for temporary accommodation, but with a view to those being social housing in the future. You're absolutely right to say that the challenge is in relation to the potential implications that the rental charge on those properties would have. So at the moment, if those homes were to be charged at a housing executive rent, which as we know is much, much lower, that would have potentially an impact on the balance sheet of the housing executive, because it would not, at a low rent, cover the cost of that purchase over the lifetime of the home. So in other words, the second alternative was to go to local housing allowance rents, so higher rents, kind of closer to market rents, lower end of the market rents. The impact of that then means that a top-up would be required to cover the cost of that, and that would have an AMI implication. The discussions are ongoing with Treasury. Again, I have a number of meetings forthcoming. When I came into post, that was one of my priorities that I set for myself, to understand where that's at. And I have a number of meetings coming up. And committee, I really look forward to updating you on this. I hope I will be in a position to update you more positively. I can only speak for myself, and this is my own view. I am frustrated to find that what appeared to be a sensible solution, a sustainable solution to the need for additional temporary accommodation at a sustainable level has not been possible. It is taking too long, and so it is a priority for myself to find out at the point at which we can solve this. The alternative, quite frankly, is to find another solution, and we don't want to go there. Currently we need, we may need as many as 6,000 units of temporary accommodation. 600 homes obviously are just 10% of that, but we must have, and 5 or 6 years ago, when COVID hit and we needed an increased supply of temporary accommodation, I was very unhappy to find actually that the Strategic Housing Authority didn't have its own ready supply of temporary accommodation in its own, other than its own hostel accommodation. So we need to fix that. It is done in other jurisdictions, and so the questions that I'm now asking as an accounting officer with a different hat on is, how do we solve this? And I'm very happy to come back to you and keep updating you on that.
What's the timeline in relation to when you can provide it?
I can't give you a timeline other than to say in my week, my third week, I've already asked for meetings on this. So I will come. I'm very happy to come back with a timeline when I know more.
Okay, then my other question then is in relation to the Irish language strategy, but first of all I want to ask you around the place names project in Queen's, that vital service that's providing interpretation and translation services for sign language or for sign applications. Why have the department indicated that funding will only last to the summer? And I have to say I have a very specific concern here, because this is a very specialised field, and if we lose people out of that field, even were the money to be available, we may not have the people. So why is that not being seen as a priority?
Chair, if you can bear with me just on this particular point, I'm not across that particular detail unless, John, there's anything that you want to add, but I'm very happy to follow up.
Chair, I'd like to take the opportunity to follow up, but without a budget, all funded parties were provided an interim allocation for the first quarter, so that could explain why they've only been provided funding until the summer, but I would need to confirm if that's the case.
Okay, but you commit to coming back to me on that.
Absolutely.
It's one that I think serious damage could be caused with potentially what is a short-term problem could lead to a long-term if there's not a proper understanding and communication. In relation to the Irish language strategy itself, are we going to see an Irish language strategy in this mandate?
Yes, so if I just brief you on I suppose where the progress is at. As you know, this has required a number of executive departments working together. All of the departments are now currently engaged in the development of those strategies, both Ulster Scots language, the Heritage and Culture strategy and the Irish language strategy. And there has been, as you know, a cross-departmental working group, and I apologise if I'm telling you things you already know. I suppose it's worth me just saying at this point, and I've already seen since I've come into the department the scale of the work that's involved. I know officials are working urgently on this. I've had a number of meetings with them as part of my first day briefings and so on. I won't go into detail and comment any further on live legal proceedings, but just to say the issuing of those proceedings has of course had a resource impact on officials, those working on the strategies having had to take time to deal with those matters connected. But certainly,
sorry, Grainia, yes. I'm going to. So that's what we hear we hear that every time. I have to say, and that's a part of the frustration. And I understand. I accept that work is ongoing. What I want to know is, and given that this has been the subject of court proceedings, and there's been a very clear call that this must be done. As Permanent Secretary, can you commit that this strategy will be delivered in this mandate?
I can certainly commit to ensuring that we will have the resources internally, because my role is to ensure that the staff and the officials in the department are working on that. I'm very happy to ensure that and to commit to that. There has been a huge amount of cross-departmental work ongoing. We now have a document that we are working through with the Minister, and that will then go to commissioners. It will then go to further consultation. So certainly the urgency is there. I'm always careful, and I hope you don't see me as obfuscating in any way. I'm always careful to say I can guarantee something by the end of a mandate, particularly when this set of strategies are executive strategies and we are dependent on others feeding into them. But I will ensure that there is no lack of urgency on this, and that officials are as they are, and I've had those briefings to meet working very, very closely together. So where we can do it, we will do it. But there is, as you know, the need for full consultation on this, and that's absolutely right.
So you've said the resources, you'll ensure the resources are in place. Is that indicating that there are the resources there to do it in this mandate? If it doesn't happen in this mandate, that will have been a political decision? I don't know that yet, because I'm new to the department, so just bear with me as I work my way through that. Okay, and I suppose just the final one from me, and then I'm coming to members, is around I know the commissioners have appeared in front of the Executive Office recently, both Ulster Scots and the Irish Language Commissioners, expressing concerns around the substance. Now, we haven't as a committee seen any substance, but they're expressing concerns. Are you committed to engage with them to address their concerns? So absolutely, the engagement will have to happen, and the versions of the next version of the document that has been developed by the cross-departmental working group, the intention is that that commissioners will, once that's been approved by Minister, the engagement will commence with commissioners. So. Okay, thank you. I'm going to come to members then. So I'm going to come first of all to our Deputy Chair, Cathy Mason, then have Melissa, Pam and Kelly. So go ahead, Cathy, please.
Colm. Morning, Grainia, and just like Colm has already said, you're really welcome. I know you've been here many times, and I really do wish you all the best in your role. It is disappointing, I suppose, that it's not the Minister sitting here. As you've said, you're only 3 weeks into your tenure, so it can't be easy for you to have to answer these questions, so it's disappointing that it's not the Minister sitting there. We are going to hear, no doubt, later on in the budget conversation how extremely tight budgets are. We hear it across the board. It's no secret. Every sector is crying out. And we hear it from the Minister time and again as well. And to be quite frank, it's batted out there as an excuse for the, I suppose, lack of delivery. And he gets very offended when he's questioned on it as well. Now, we do see that there's money for marching bands. There's hundreds of thousands of pounds for US 250 projects, with money for churches, with £40 million for Ulster Folk Museum. All of these seem to have been prioritised over housing, over tackling homelessness, lifting children out of poverty, even the energy support scheme. Do you, coming into this role, see that as a good prioritisation of the department's budget?
The role of the accounting officer is very clear and set out very clearly in managing public money, and so I will take the same approach as any accounting officer will, which is to ensure that the resources that we assign are assigned in the right way to meet departmental and ultimately ministerial priorities. There are a range of measures and steps that all accounting officers must take to ensure that I apply those resources carefully, and that's what I see across the department, and I have no cause for concern in terms of what I see as an accounting officer in terms of the allocation of resources. That is my role, and it goes no further than that. You'll have a very strong briefing from John shortly and colleagues in relation to the budget more generally. I think what's really, really important in allocating all resources, be they people, time or money, and that's and we can talk about money in the widest sense in terms of subsidy, is that we are doing that in a strategic way, that where we are making changes and efficiencies in the year to come, and we'll talk about this more, that we do that in a strategic way so that the public understands that when we make decisions that we're open and we are transparent in how we do that.
And I appreciate that, but the public understands, so the public are looking at millions of pounds being spent on a range of different projects, but we have seen very little movement on housing, on tackling homelessness and lifting children out of poverty. We've still no anti-poverty strategy. Can you understand how the public probably won't see that? And it's concerning that you say that you are content that these finances have been assigned in the right way.
Yes, because the role of the accounting office is to assure himself or herself that when money is allocated, that it's allocated in the right way and it's spent in the right way. And so that my role as an accounting officer is to do that. The Minister will set
You're
priorities
content that it's spent in the right way?
Of course, and if I had concerns, and of course that's ultimately why, and hardly need to tell anyone around this committee why all departments are subject to audit office, both external audit and internal audit. So my role is to provide that assurance, and I'm comfortable with what I've seen. I'm 3 weeks in. I will always continue to look.
Okay. I want to just follow on from some of the line of questioning from the chair as well. So I appreciate where you've outlined where we are with the Irish language strategy. What I will say is we've been waiting now for 20 years on an Irish language strategy. Conor and Gaeilge have been in court 3 times as recently as January, fighting for basic rights for Irish language speakers. You've now taken control, steering the ship of the department that is leading on delivering this Irish language strategy. Unfortunately, we do have a minister who seems to be more intent and given more energy on blocking it than actually delivering it. Has the minister given you any direction on the Irish language strategy?
Sorry, just so direction is a very specific word. Absolutely, I'm come into the department and I found a piece of work that is ongoing, that we have officials working on, that I have had briefings in relation to the work that's been taken forward, and I've no reason to think that this isn't something that's been taken forward as urgently as the other priorities of the department are. So
can Irish language speakers out there now, can they be content that the Irish language strategy is a priority and it will be delivered?
So what I've seen is that all of the strategies are a priority, and I'm very happy to say to you that that's what I've seen.
Okay, so just then another, so the gender inequality and LGBTQ strategy, is that a priority?
Yes, however, what I have and what I understand to be the case is that it has been a decision that the Minister has taken, that he has prioritised a number of strategies given the resource, both people, time and money necessary. So the strategies that we've already talked about, the language strategies, the anti-poverty strategy, the disability strategy and the active ageing plan are those areas where officials are working at pace to progress. Naturally, the Minister has prioritised those for now over those other 2 strategies that you've mentioned, but certainly he has asked from officials, for a very clear path in terms of taking those forward. So it's not, and he's very clear that this is not about not undertaking work on them, but in terms of the people, the time and the money that are required, that focus is on the anti-poverty strategy, the language strategies that we've set out, disability and active ageing. And as I say, but he is very clear and has been clear to officials that he wants to see a critical path for those other strategies.
So again, Grainia, and I'm not putting this on you, I understand it's ministerial priorities, but you will understand that there's a sector watching that will be very disappointed, and that I don't think it'll come as a surprise to them that they're not being prioritised. There's been virtually no progress made on this. We were speaking earlier about co-design and the bill that we seen passed this week for the deaf community, and one of the huge benefits that right across the committee was the real co-design, working on that and how the sector were involved in that. Now the Minister has indicated that he is fundamentally opposed to the views of those LGBTQ co-design groups. How, if the Minister is outlining he's opposed to their views, how can we, or how can they, see any light at the end of the tunnel, that there's going to be any progression on this? Because the fact that it's not being prioritised and the fact that he's saying he's opposed to the views, they're putting it together that it's not going to be delivered.
I have not had a conversation with the Minister in my not yet at 3 weeks on this particular issue, so I'm happy to come back, and you'll have to bear with me. But as I say, it is the case that I have not had a conversation with him on this Monday.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Marisa, Lanaray, le Cash 10, le Hall.
Fáilte rófa Grainia agus John agus Cogarges Grainia the new foster so Abor Arts. So congratulations to you in your new post, and wish you the best luck and for filling that role. Probably this first test of committee in that role as well too for you. Grainia, and my concern again too was about the lack of progress that there seems to be when it does come to sort of many of these strategies. There isn't anything that I could confidently say I would see coming to fruition before the end of this particular mandate. And I know that you just had identified the three that seem to be prioritised, we'll say, by the Minister in relation to the anti-poverty strategy, disability strategy and the Irish language strategy. And while not the resources now are there, the financial resources, and given, do you have an opinion on the amount of monies in that have been spent by the Department already in court cases, particularly in relation to the Irish language and that?
So no, I don't, and again, I will be careful, being new to the role, in terms of what I discuss in relation to legal matters, both in terms of how they're progressing and the money that we spend. But again, I will be guided by both colleagues and this committee in relation to providing you with information. There'll be no lack of information, so I'm very happy to follow up on that point. I think it's really important that I say to committee I'm being clear here. I'm not seeing a lack of progress on strategies from an official level. I have seen the work that is ongoing, both on the anti-poverty strategy, both on the language strategies, and in relation to disability and active ageing. There has been much movement. It is absolutely appropriate that those strategies are undertaken with full consultation. We all know where we are, both in relation to the anti-poverty strategy and all of the others. So I will continue to pursue those. I will be making sure that officials are clear to me about where progress is, and where we can undertake continued discussion with the various different partners and sectors. We will do that. So those strategies are deeply important, and I will always be asking the question, how are we making progress, where are we making progress, where are the next milestones, and will make myself available to this committee in relation to that.
And again, in relation to this committee, I know it will continue to ask the same questions, just what progress has been made. And as I say, at a personal level, I'm very interested in the progress or the lack of it in terms of the Irish language strategy. But something that maybe that you're more at home with is in relation to your previous role in the housing executive and so on. Can I ask you about the revitalisation of the housing executive? Where are we at with that?
So progress has been made. I've been at this committee for 5 years saying progress has been made, so it's been incredibly slow. While those years pass, what has happened, and I know there's absolute consensus in relation to this, is the fact that the gap between the housing executive's rental income and its investment requirement has increased yet further. The last financial year, was the first year in which its annual investment requirement was not met through rent. That's the first time that has not happened. In other words, that rent received has not paid for the full annual investment programme. That means it's dipping into that reserve base, which is also intending to pay for 600 homes. So it has reached a critical juncture. The Minister has made this his absolute priority, and I'm seeing that coming into the department, the extent to which the ministerial engagement is so strong in relation to this, and his engagement with the Finance Minister, and ongoing engagement beyond that into Treasury. There is, without question, an understanding now, very strong understanding across department finance colleagues and Treasury colleagues on the urgency that's attached to it. I think they understand the numbers very effectively. I think they understand exactly what is required. It is no longer a case that on foot of a meeting with Treasury in December, it is no longer the case that the stumbling block here is a rule change, a borrowing change. It is now a case of the source of that borrowing. Okay, so in other words, will that come from Northern Ireland executive borrowing, or will that come from wider UK government borrowing, or somewhere else? Okay, and so for example, there are a number of other infrastructure-related funding sources, public funding, and I need to be very clear, we're all looking at public funding sources here, available. And so the conversations that are taking place currently are how we use that, how we attract that borrowing. But of course, the Housing Executive is not the only organisation trying to borrow. And so there is a very clear upper limit, not just for Northern Ireland executive borrowing, but also for UK government. There is a very clear target for borrowing trends across UK government. So while it is, I'm pleased to say that there is an acceptance that the Housing Executive should and could be able to borrow. The source of that borrowing, the debate has now changed to the source of that borrowing, and so the Housing Executive is now one of many priorities. Public housing is now one of many priorities now, seeking to access public funding. And just to be absolutely clear, we are only looking at public funding here. So look, positive, but we're now part of a different debate. I'd far rather be here than where we were this time last year, when we didn't have that clarity in relation to the ability to borrow. But the next set of conversations, which are ongoing, are how we do that, and those will need to be urgent. And I'm conscious I've said that many things are urgent this morning, but as ever thus.
Are you confident that we'll see progress in that whole year prior to the end of, we'll say, this mandate?
So currently, as the Chancellor made clear in her spending review last year, the Chancellor did reference the full fiscal framework negotiations for discussions on Northern Ireland Housing Executive borrowing. That remains the case. And so as of today, that remains the case. So if that were the case, then we all know the timeline for fiscal framework negotiations could be potentially substantial. So I think that there's no question that there is a need in the interim for a solution, a borrowing solution for the Housing Executive, for some kind of, I'm going to use the phrase bridging finance, but I'm sure that's not correct, but I will use that for now. But for there is no doubt that the Housing Executive's reserves are under incredible strain. And if the Housing Executive has to reduce its programme of investment from about 240 million to anything under 200 million, that is coming out of our local economy, and it's immediate. So it improves its homes by contracting local construction companies. They in turn subcontract to very small construction companies who also use local supply chains. Any reduction in Housing Executive spend in its homes will have an immediate impact on the local economy, and that's what my concern would be.
Okay. And something I'd hope that I'd see, because the Housing Executive always had the greatest sort of respect for the work and that you do there, and that they would be supported and assisted in any way possible to continue with that work.
Thank you, Melissa. And so I'm going now to Pam, Kelly, Sean, and then Morris. Pam, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and you're very welcome, Grainia. Congratulations on your appointment to this role. Very important role, but I'm sure you're more than able for the brief. It is a huge department. I'm still trying to get grips of the many things that are talked about in this committee. So we don't envy your challenge ahead, that's for sure. In terms of housing specifically, and clearly that's a passion of yours and you have great experience in it, but what do you see as the biggest structural barrier to to increasing that housing supply, and we do understand that the housing stress is a real issue, and it affects all tenures of housing. We've seen it across everything, down to home buying and private rental prices, all the rest of it. That availability is incredible. So it's really important that we do get those numbers up and get more houses built. So what do you see as the biggest structural barrier to increasing that housing supply?
So I suppose the housing supply strategy now gives us a very really strong strategic framework for that. Fundamentally, I suppose as of today, April 26th, the biggest barrier to social housing new build is capital funding. Okay, and so to get to the programme for government commitment of 5850, we need to be hitting 2,300 and above. And so in this forthcoming, in the financial year in which we're currently in, there is capacity within the system in terms of the number of homes on the programme for about 2,300. So that will leave us short, okay, of the 5850 target. So there are a number of issues here. If the capital funding becomes available, we have to get that funding up to 2,300 to meet the capacity within the system. That is going to be very, very difficult, and actually could require the Minister to deprioritise other capital priorities. So he will have a difficult decision ahead of him. Do I prioritise social housing new build to get the funding up to 2,300, or do I fund the other priorities within the department? And we will have, no doubt, many conversations to advise them in order to do that. So capital is an issue, capacity to a certain extent is an issue. Wastewater, just to cover the issue of wastewater, up to now in the last number of years, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've had very, very positive and proactive engagement with Northern Ireland Water to de-risk the new build programme as much as we can. We've had site-specific interventions so that we can look on a site-by-site basis at how we reduce wastewater treatment concerns. So far, the last 2 years, the last 3 years of programme has not been negatively impacted. The homes that were on the programme have been built. This year, the Housing Executive will do the same. It will layer its programme of new build that it's commissioning from housing associations with the data that it has from Northern Ireland Water. And as I say, my understanding currently, and I don't believe anything has changed, is that this year's forthcoming programme, providing we can find those solutions, looks positive in terms of wastewater infrastructure not being an inherent barrier. Going beyond that, fundamentally, my view is that we need to approach social housing new build, really as we should any other form of infrastructure, and it needs to be core and central to the investment strategy. It needs to have a 10-year line of sight, because we have an absolutely wonderful sector of housing associations, but we ask a lot of them. We are funding a new build programme on an annualised basis. We are asking them to take decisions and to undertake balance sheet risks that, for them and their boards, which will be quite difficult, okay? And so far they have absolutely not been found wanting. They have come forward, they have hit their targets, and the department, working with the Housing Executive and housing associations, it is a great partnership, and other jurisdictions often look to us and say, actually that's really good, can we have some of that? But I do think they need much, much more certainty, and an annualised programme is not good enough, and even a 3-year programme is not good enough. We should have a 10-year programme. But the housing supply strategy aims to do that by setting the numbers, and it sets out very clearly, here's the numbers we need over the next 10 years. I should also add, it's not just about social housing, we also need to build intermediate housing, and there's a very clear target in the strategy for intermediate housing. And as you know, officials in the department have briefed this committee on the work it's doing in relation to 300 intermediate homes. So they are homes that are not homes for sale in the open market, not social housing, but in between. Okay, and they will tend to be for key workers, for people on above average incomes, who cannot afford homes in the open market, but obviously need housing and don't qualify for social housing. We've commissioned, the department has commissioned 300 of those. We need to get up to 12,000. So the question that I've been asking since I've come into the department, and we will be having a number of meetings on this shortly, is how we drive momentum towards that intermediate housing target. It is critically important because fundamentally, if we have more intermediate housing, that takes the pressure off the social housing waiting list. There are many, many households, thousands of households on the social housing waiting list that have said to us, we would be delighted with intermediate housing. We could afford it just about, but the products aren't there. And housing associations, to their credit, have said, we would like those products to come forward. So there is a very, very important piece of work that the department needs to do with planning authorities and with associations and others to really bring forward intermediate models at scale urgently in this decade. And so I've begun to ask those questions, and we'll come back in due course with some answers on that, because there's a lot of work to be done. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's very helpful, thank you. And touch on the wastewater stuff is something I was going to ask you, so also very helpful, thank you, Grainia. So I suppose that housing plan, even a multi-year budget, it, as you say, is not going to be sufficient, but it's certainly going to be better than annual. So how important is it that the funding comes with that multi-year budget in order to see, and this committee has supported and written to the executive with its support, that we see the full funding in order to see the housing supply strategy actually come to fruition, because we need those houses. So how important is it?
Hugely important. I think a multi-year budget gives certainty to housing associations, it gives certainty to developers, it gives certainty to anybody who has an interest in this, including, of course, most importantly, to the people on the waiting list, and at a time, and it gives certainty to lenders. Okay, so all of those parts of the puzzle are really, really important. I think the other point about a multi-year budget, the bit that has kind of frustrated probably all of us, is you get to the end of March, and if a scheme for whatever reason doesn't pass planning, but in all other ways would pass planning in the following month, it falls out of the programme, and that's really frustrating to local people, local councillors who've been working on a scheme maybe for a long time and so on. So it will take some of the edges off the programme, I hope, and how we manage that with the housing executive is going to be very important. I know I've said this many times, but the other key factor here is to look beyond just capital. In other jurisdictions we use land more effectively, and so the Minister has been taking forward a piece of work, is really committed to it, and is bringing forward an executive paper to look at ways in which we can better use public land across the public sector estate to bring forward, to use that to reduce the capital requirement, because if you have land already, then it reduces the capital requirement. You're not going out to the market to buy land, you have the land, and then that reduces the capital requirement for development. So you're meeting the development costs rather than both the land and development costs. So that work is ongoing, and as I say, I've asked, and I'm looking through the paper myself literally this week to work my way through what that would look like. I suppose the other point, and we haven't really touched on it, but is maybe for another day, is how we make better use of existing homes themselves, and existing, I shouldn't really say existing homes, existing stock, existing physical assets. We all know from our local communities, whether it's office space, derelict space and so on. So again, to meet our targets, we are going to have to not just focus on new build, but I've asked for a piece of work to commence, which is underway by officials. They're being very helpful in starting these pieces of work off, to look at if we don't meet the new build target in the programme for government, what could we meet by being a little bit more creative, a little bit more innovative, and what's out there that could be available. And I think that's very important. And again, some of that would be commercially sensitive, and I'm very happy to come into committee at the right time, Chair, to brief you on that.
And just if I may, Pam, on that issue of existing buildings, so could we look at a strategy whereby we know we need single occupancy units? Is there a way to marry those up?
Most definitely. Again, I would be very happy to come in. It would probably best to do that in a closed session, because some of it will be commercially sensitive. If we are going out to the market to do some of this, I think it's best. But I'm very, very happy to do that. I think there is an opportune moment for us to think about how we should be more interventionist in the market to purchase what we can. But again, I think probably best to maybe have that conversation in closed session, if you're content, obviously.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to move on, Pam. I'll come back if time allows, but I'm going to have to move on. You've had a fairly crack there up to date. So I have Kelly, Sean and Morris.
I'll try my best to rattle through a lot, but a lot of it's going to come back on you, John, with the budget. Congratulations, Grainia, welcome. I don't know whether it's out of the frying pan into the fire, but
wonderful. It's all good. It's all good.
I share concerns that some of the other committee members have about the social strategies, the harm that has been caused to the expert groups that were involved in those strategies that have now been parked. is something I think as Permanent Secretary you'll probably come up against moving forward, and particularly in the disability sector, who all felt that they had got to a place where some of those social strategies were there and then they have been set aside, so that there's a lot of work to bring back that confidence within the community. So I just wanted to ask about that. You'd said about, obviously, the minister had decided on the way that the strategies were going to be delivered. Have the staff that were working on the LGBTQIA and the gender strategies, have they been then relocated into the other strategies to deliver on them?
So again, this is work ongoing, and again, as an incoming accounting officer, I will always ask those kinds of questions. I don't have answers yet because it is genuinely just so new to me. So I will be looking at, as I said earlier, the people, the time and the money that we are spending on those strategies. I want to leave this committee with this, the strongest of message from me that there is no lack of urgency. I fully appreciate that, and as somebody who spent many years working in the voluntary community sector, running organisations in the voluntary community sector, the voice of not just organisations who will undertake this work in partnership with us is hugely important. The voice of the people that we serve is essential, critical, and so all of that work is being taken forward with urgency. I'm very happy to come back to you, and Kelly, I will come back to you on the point about resources once I've mapped some of that out. And John?
So Kelly, I can provide a little detail. So Minister wanted to take a phased approach based to the strategies. Not unusual to departments given the restrained resources we face, and you'll appreciate that policy groups are dependent on other technical areas across departments, people like analytics specialists, data specialists and so on. So a significant amount of work has already been undertaken on the gender equality strategy, sexual orientation or LGBTQI based on previous co-design and engagement. Minister has asked officials now that the anti-poverty and disability strategies have reached a stage that they work with stakeholders to see how they progress those strategies. So to be succinct and concise in your question, there have been policy officials working on those strategies consistently. It was more about the resources in other parts of the department because policy areas rely on various inputs to develop the strategy.
Yeah. Just when we're talking about staff and Grainia, unfortunately you've inherited a department that has a huge amount of vacancies and a dependence on temporary staff. Just from different reports that have come out, that issue over the recruitment, we know that there are many issues behind that, and one of them is how long it takes for the recruitment process for the civil service to work. I'm just wondering, and for expediency, is there any intention to take some of the reports that have come through to decentralise some of this work and to contract it out to external bodies? I'm thinking in particular those strategies that we've been waiting on for quite some time had got to a stage where they were almost there. If it's a case of resourcing, is it time to move to external providers? I'm particularly worried about the concern about if there isn't enough resourcing, we could even see a delay to people getting benefits.
So I think it's really important, I suppose, at this point to say, yes, it is a very large department. It's the largest department in people terms, and I suppose what all departments need, in fact, what all large organisations need, is a strategic workforce plan. What does that actually mean? It means you should have a view into the future. What are the services we're going to provide? What's the balance between policy, strategy, and delivery in a department? And how is that going to change over the next number of years? Those are easy questions to answer. It takes a little bit of time, but they are answerable questions. And a workforce strategy would set out the skills, the type of skills, the people that we're going to need. And so that's the work that's underway. Myself, John and colleagues have had conversations on that already. It's well underway. And so that workforce strategy will answer those questions. And what we need, not just this department, but I can only speak for this department, is agility in terms of ensuring that we have the right people in the right roles, that we have a plan for those individuals, that we have really strong focus on learning and development and well-being, and something I feel very passionately about, in order to provide public services. Okay, and one of the, I think, really important steps that was underway is a pilot which was completed recently in the Northwest, where we looked specifically, this is well before my time, at how we take a greater approach to agility in procurement. In other words, in recruitment, in other words, reducing down the length of time that it takes to bring people into an organisation. And again, this secured 350, this pilot secured 350 substantive posts in under 12 weeks. So it was a really, really good exercise. We learned a lot end to end. Nick's HR learned a lot in terms of how you do that, the approach that we took. Literally saying a localised, place-based approach to recruitment. So we have just commenced last week, the week before, another round of that. That's to answer your question, Kelly, in relation to ensuring that we have that pipeline of talent coming into the organisation, reducing, we hope, over time, the attrition rate. We have, obviously, like many big organisations, our age profile, we are losing 40 to 50 people each month. Due to a range of reasons, but a lot of retirements, and so that strategic workforce plan. Where are we going? What do we need? What do we need in terms of talent? Alongside a much more agile approach to recruitment, and is really, really important. I won't cover it today, but also as part of that is the retention point. The best employers retain people well. What retains people well? A whole host of things, but a people strategy that has well-being at its heart. We have to be looking after our people, and our people strategy across the civil service is key to that. But as I say, we are on that point around understanding how we bring recruitment in. And I suppose the final point I would make, I'm sure, John, you'll want to come in on this point, is around vacancy management. I have looked in detail at those numbers in relation to the net numbers of vacancies, and we had a discussion this week at our senior leadership team meeting in relation to how we take an approach to vacancy management, and I think that's really, really important that we do that as an organisation. So it is very much a priority. John, what have I forgotten and left out?
No. So the department led on the new approach to recruitment, working very closely with colleagues in NICS HR, which Grainia has referenced. I think it is important to note to committee the very stark benefits this has. The previous AO competition took more than 18 months from beginning to allocation. So when you get to allocation, you're speaking to people who applied for a job some 18 months ago, which means your dropout rate is massive. 12 weeks is quite a change. The recruitment campaign that Grainia mentioned that launched last week is actually to address 738 vacancies in Belfast for administration officers. Now around 85% are those in our DWP business, but we also did this for principal accountants. We got 36 principal accountants in 12 weeks. We have one coming for industrial workers. So we are moving to a more agile, place-based recruitment alongside the people strategy that will address some of the things at Grainia. How do we address retention? How do we make the NICS a more attractive place to work? And lastly, on the vacancy control, given the very stark budget position that we're facing into, that you will all be aware of and will have heard much from, it is absolutely incumbent on the civil service to ask very difficult questions each time there is a vacancy. Is this needed? Will this be needed in the future? To your question, is there another way that this can be done? And they are all questions that are being asked in a rigorous and consistent manner in the department, and are now starting to embed in processes which will form the foundation for a strategic workforce plan, which we are committed to bring forward by the end of this financial year.
I'm just a wee bit worried that,
briefly, Kelly.
the centralisation of staff. Red tape challenge was while I was working in the community and voluntary sector, and to be honest, road safety grants were actually handled in the community and voluntary sector in the past. I know it's not within the Department for Communities, but there are options and answers out there that others can do. I don't often hear that being discussed of the cost-benefit analysis of the options. It's always, let's get these vacancies sorted out, and to be honest, HR Connect does my head.
I can give you a personal view on this. So what you describe is something that I've talked to Grainia about, and I think the key word here is agility and efficiency, and that's what we'll be looking to do. If we can administer something in a different way, whether that's going to a third party and do it robustly, rigorously, but also in an agile manner, faster and better, why aren't we doing it?
Well, to be honest, if it was in the private sector, HR Connect would have been sacked a long time ago, because a boss would have said, how long?
Thank you, Kelly. I'm going to have to move on, Kelly. Sorry. I'm moving now to Sian. Go ahead, Sian.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome, Grainia. Others have said congratulations. I don't know if it's commiserations or not, but
Thank you.
but good luck with what you have ahead of you. No better woman. I wanted to ask about the anti-poverty strategy. We've heard quite a lot over the last probably the last few months around the role of councils in delivering the anti-poverty strategy. And recently, I attended an EVOG training session, and what struck me was how central councils were to delivery on the ground for that executive strategy. So I'm just wondering whether there will be a shift, if you've discussed that, in terms of working with councils as active partners in the design, delivery and monitoring rather than just simply consultees. And I suppose linked to that then is around the funding aspect of the anti-poverty strategy. When you look at EVOG, it had the local change fund. There was 3.5 million allocated to all 11 councils to support that community-based action. When I look at the draft budget that we have, and I know this maybe veers slightly into John's remit, when we look at that draft budget for the next 3 years, I don't see an equivalent dedicated funding line for the anti-poverty strategy, never mind something like a local delivery fund. So the question around the funding is, how does the department expect the anti-poverty strategy to be delivered on the ground without that dedicated funding stream? So it's really around council's role and then the dedicated funding stream.
Thanks, Sian. So I suppose first of all to say absolutely yes, and can't say it strongly enough. I'm both personally a big fan of community planning and what it has delivered and what it continues to deliver. I'm a huge fan of place-based approach to delivery. I'm actually very excited by the new neighbourhood model that has been launched by the Department of Health, and I think that gives a huge opportunity for the integration of services at a local level. And when I say services, I mean all services locally. My own view always has been, even to the last question Kelly asked about, is we need to get the policy and the strategy and the delivery balance right in governance and government terms in Northern Ireland. So where I can move things locally, I always will. That's my natural bent. I think it works when you get services as close to people that we serve as possible. So I couldn't imagine a way in which the anti-poverty strategy, or indeed any intervention on anti-poverty, could be taken without local provision and local services. So that would be my view, and that's always the lens that I will take in the way I'll look at it. I absolutely also take the point that strategies need to be resourced. I suppose what I would say, and this might be mildly controversial, is I'm not sure we're as good as we could be generally. I don't just mean the department, I just mean generally at setting out in strategies, what are we doing currently? What is working? How can we bring, through a little bit of engineering, a whole range of funding and funding streams together more effectively to achieve objectives? And sometimes when I say that, people think that automatically means I'm saying, oh, do you know what, we're going to club budgets together and we're going to do less, we're just going to strip out budgets. It genuinely isn't. It's meant to look at ways in which, how can we be a bit more strategic in bringing funding opportunities or funding streams together to give people more clarity, to give voluntary community sector partners more clarity. So it's not about spending less necessarily, but it is about achieving more. I absolutely take the point that a good strategy requires resources. We need to start with what we have. We need to start and understand the impacts of what we have, what's going well, what's going less well, what's not delivering. If we can divert resources away from things that aren't delivering as effectively, then we should do that. That's my job as accounting officer. I have to ask those often uncomfortable questions, but I fully take the point around this will require some resource, and it will be a combination of people and time and money, which I've said a number of times. But John, I don't know if there's anything you want to answer specifically on the budget line. So
on the budget line, obviously there's inputs from all of the other departments. This is an executive strategy. The public consultation is closed and the development of the action plan is underway. Currently, within the 3-year budget, there's no specific anti-poverty line for a lot of the reasons that Grainia spoke about, in that there would need to be an action plan and inputs from all of the other departments. And to support Grainia's view, like many of the contributory factors to poverty, I think there is probably a need to look at the current provision, think about how that can be engineered and joined up in a better way, and that will all come through the action plan and obviously the paper returning to the executive.
Do we have a timeline for the action plan?
I'll need to get back to you, and Shauna, I know it's being worked on.
Okay. The other question that I have is around discretionary support, obviously key crisis support net. Department has maintained that grant budget at, I think it's at 25.5 million for 25-26. I'm not seeing a clearly protected line for it in the multi-year budget, but The question I have, just Grainia, is really, I understand there has been some consideration, and there was mention of it from the minister at some point, was moving away from cash support towards vouchers.
Yeah.
What evidence base is the department relying on for that? And the wider evidence that I've seen is that cash first crisis support is more flexible, more dignified, more effective, and I'm just concerned that any change reduces flexibility. So can you assure the committee that any future change to discretionary support is going to be assessed, consulted on, and informed by data rather than anything else?
Thanks, John. I'm going to ask John to come in on that one, and I can.
Yeah, so I can speak to both. So in terms of the 3-year revenue budget through the spending review, all we have at this stage, Sean, is a top line draft indicative allocation. It would be for Minister to decide if he is going to continue to supporting people in the way he has in previous budgets, with the 25.9 million that has been dedicated. So that will be a decision that will happen when we receive a budget from the executive, or if not, when we receive a budget from the Department of Finance in that situation. In terms of, there is an ongoing review of discretionary support that is looking at a number of different models for how discretionary support might be delivered. The one you refer to is more of a direct delivery model. I believe that work is nearing completion, and that'll go to Minister for his consideration, and that review is of course taking views of stakeholders and taking views of the data and performance of the current programme.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And Maurice. Go ahead, Maurice.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's just, if I could ask Grainia, and Grainia, also welcome you to your new position. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Likewise.
We've had a few meetings in the past, and they were quite cordial and very productive, so I hope that trend continues. My question, Chair, is around benefit and fraud. Has there been any scoping exercise taking place to see how much money that is being saved through fraud, and also how much money is being lost through error? I think it needs to be balanced, and if we could have some idea of the money saved through benefit fraud and the money lost through benefit errors, if we could have some sort of correlation between the two, please.
Thank you, Maurice. Yes, indeed. And I know this is an area that the Minister has both briefed the committee in the past, and has also made this an area of focus for himself and for officials. Obviously, there were a number of recommendations from a task and finish group or report that he established with a very strong focus on reducing fraud and error. I think what I will do is send you some of the statistics that I have in front of me, both in terms of the scale and the nature of fraud and error, so including the levels of, so for example, on average, the department receives around 10,000 allegations per year, and that the allegations are then obviously reviewed before routing to the appropriate team. The estimated global loss due to fraud across all benefits was 2.5%. And I think it's really, really important that we focus on percentage terms here, understandably, because the benefit bill is large. Any number without understanding the context here could be viewed as much higher than it actually is. So it's a 2%, as I say, global loss due to fraud, 2.5% in 2024. And that was an increase from 2% in 2023 and continues to rise. So we have put in place, officials at the Minister's urging, have put in place a series of measures to look at ways in which to, not to look at, but to deliver ways in which we would reduce fraud and error. And we are beginning to see the effect of that, both in terms of what it's doing to the numbers, but actually probably just as importantly, what it's doing to the culture and the delivery of benefits and benefit entitlement. So I think, Chair, with your agreement, I can send in a follow-up letter, because there's a lot to go through here, and then this may be something you'd want to cover in more detail, but both with myself and with Lindsay, our Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Yeah, I think that'll be useful. Yeah, back to you, Maurice.
Thank you very much, Grainia. I find that very, very interesting, and I look forward to the figures when you send them to me. But I would rather use a term of, I would say, efficiency and effectiveness rather than fraud and error. But that's just the way it is. The other question I have, Chair, is around antisocial behaviour throughout the housing stock in Northern Ireland. Antisocial behaviour is becoming an increasing problem, especially for good neighbours and good tenants, and it's not been properly dealt with either by the PSNI or by the department.
I have to say, I have been surprised by, or I would definitely note, the increase in the amount of times even I've been asked this question in the last 18 months. So Maurice, you're absolutely right. If people are asking the question, then they're asking the question for a reason. And when I left, as I was leaving the Housing Executive, it was something we had a discussion on a strategic level. Antisocial behaviour had kind of moved away as an issue and has come back. And so there is a piece of work to be done. Look, this is me just entirely personally speculating. Is this the impact of reduced budgets in key areas of focus, in key areas of public services? I don't know is the answer. Is it down to something else? So I think rather than try and give you a kind of a glib short answer, just to say to you, I agree, even if the perception is that antisocial behaviour is increasing, as well as the reality of it increasing, then it's something we need to pay attention to. So I'm very happy, Chair, to take this away as something that we give some further focus to. You'll be aware there is obviously forthcoming legislation on the matter to strengthen up responses and levers available to both to landlords and to other partners locally. But I think it's more than that. It feels to me like a more strategic issue, and again, it's something that we need to discuss, the department, councils, PSNI, landlords and other partners. So again, very happy that this is something we come back to, as I say, rather than give you a short answer, other than to say I certainly agree that it is coming up much, much more as an issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Grainia. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you, Maurice. And can I just pick up on a few things, some of arising from members' questions there. But first of all, I wanted to check in terms of legislation and bills that are coming for us. We're waiting for 2 of them are priority, but there's a delay. What's the delay with the other 2 in terms of housing and charities? What's the delay with bringing those forward?
Would you be content, Chair, if I follow up on that with you this week? I can get that straight away from colleagues. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll come back in a general sense on that as well. But picking up on Kelly's question there around the workforce strategy and vacancies and all of that, and you had mentioned place-based approach, you had mentioned wellbeing and people-centred, all things which I fully support. I think it's October 24, we got 1,000 jobs from DWP to support their work. 1,000 jobs were created here. Those were allocated, very rough figures. I think it was about 600 to Belfast, 400, 300 to Derry, and maybe 100 to Ballymena. Not one single job went to any of the counties of Tyrone, Armagh or Fermanagh. Not one single job. So that's a challenge to all of those elements, all of those important elements. When we asked why that was the case, we were told that the department had no infrastructure in any of those counties to employ people. What has been done about that since?
Okay, John, is that something you could answer, or will we agree to?
No. I can answer, but I'm afraid it won't be an answer that pleases the committee. DFC, like all departments, relies on estate from the Department of Finance. So the simple matter is we would need large processing and administration centres created in these locations. Department of Finance are currently working with departments on an estate strategy, but given the budget constraints we are facing, my view is it will be very difficult to see a large-scale capital building programme to house these large operational centres. Now we will work with the department to see how, because our infrastructure as it currently sits, our built infrastructure is ageing, is not a good place to be, and is I think a contributory factor to some of our retention issues. Yeah. So within those conversations, Chair, we will certainly be pushing for a greater spatial distribution. I'm sure that would be a principle, but there are budget constraints.
So well, just let me check. Do you find, either of you, that it's acceptable that no jobs were able to go to those counties on that occasion? Is that acceptable?
I don't really have a view on it, in the sense that this is one service being provided in Northern Ireland. If I gave you the easy answer would be for me to say, Chair, look, we should have people everywhere, but that's not. It's just genuinely not always possible. And so, it may well be the case that it is that we need to be providing other services in those areas. I want to bring everything back to a workforce
Grainia,
plan.
This is systemic.
Yeah. Okay.
In the department, do not have anywhere for people to work for it in those areas. Yeah. Or to work from. Now, I'm very well aware that there are places like Connect and Dungannon where people could go in, where the department to take a more creative approach. So I don't see how your strategy is place-based if half of the 6 counties are not even included.
I will take that challenge. Absolutely, you've given me something to go in.
I just don't. And you know, the reality is, if another 1,000 jobs tomorrow, those 3 counties, that's just not acceptable. And there has to be something done about that at pace. Kelly, very briefly, please.
I know quite a few of the people who work there. Most of them work from home the majority of the week. So the place that they would need to go to work in is wherever a laptop goes. So there doesn't need to be a huge big processing centre. I know that, for instance, we've moved now with Clare House with the Department of Finance and Agriculture. There's hot desking provided all over. I thought there was hot desking facilities in Enniskillen.
So there are some hot desking facilities in the current civil service policy as office attendance 2 days per week. Particularly in DWP, there's only certain sites where you can access the network resources because they're on a separate network and need to access DWP systems. So we are working with DOF about blended sites, but that's a work in progress. And when I say blended sites, they would be sites such as JBOs where NIHE are also housed, other services, as well as potentially DWP services and so on. And we're making incremental steps in that, but I will be honest with the committee, none of this is easy, given the ageing infrastructure that we have and the budget constraints.
Well, I'll tell you, John, what's not easy is to live in one of those counties and for people to say,
accept that.
We can't address that historic discrimination because there's been historic discrimination, so therefore we're going to have to keep going. That doesn't fit in with the regional balance programme for government strategy, never mind anything else. So it'll, in my view, it has to be made a priority. That is discrimination against those counties, cannot be allowed to continue. And there are lots of modern solutions that could tie into that. So those certainly need to be explored at pace. I welcome your commitment to that.
No, I do genuinely take that challenge, and you know, to go back to the point, you know, a workforce plan does what I just said earlier. It puts a plan in place to put the right people in the right jobs in the right places, as I said earlier. So look, we will look forward to further conversations. That genuinely.
Okay, well listen, thank you, and I want to thank you for your attendance today and for your contribution. I want to wish you very well in the role. I have to say I do look forward to a reset in terms of the committee's interaction. We have a duty here to scrutinise the department. To do that, we need to have information coming in time. We need to have questions that we ask being answered. That is the way that we carry out our scrutiny. It's fundamental. Committee members have, you know, there's been significant announcements made that committee members have not even been invited to. So I would look forward to a really genuine reset. I said from the outset, and it's the way I prefer to operate, is in very close cooperation. I think as a committee we have demonstrated that we can add significant value to the work of the department, but we need the information and we need those connections flowing. So if that's something that we need to look at ongoing, but I'd be really keen that that's the basis we move forward on. Likewise. And as I say, huge challenge, but I know you're more than well up for that challenge, and you have obviously significant experience in a significant part of the department which will assist, but we look forward to seeing the information you've committed to and to engaging with you again in this format. I think it's been really useful for members today. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed.
Okay.
Good to see you all.
Thank you very much. Members, I'll briefly come to a few actions, then we'll take a quick break and then we'll go into our next briefing session. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, Chair, just on a point that I raised and Kelly raised it as well, I'm quite concerned about the response around the gender equality and LGBTQ strategy. Kelly made a point that these, like that co-design group, you know, they have come to harm. And it was very stark to hear effectively being said that they were just being pushed down the ladder. And I personally would like this committee to maybe give them a voice and let's hear from them, their side of it, because we have heard the Minister have the opportunity to say that he's fundamentally opposed to their views. So I would like to hear their views. I would also like to hear what engagement they have had with the Minister, and how we can ensure that this, if they are going to be pushed down the ladder, how we can ensure that we are standing up for them and ensuring that these strategies aren't being pushed aside and are given. I'm saying are given priority, but I'm not very hopeful that they will be. But it's our duty and our role to scrutinise that. So I would like to see if we could get those groups in and hear from them directly.
Coercion group,
yeah.
Representation. Members content? Content. Okay, members, if there's no other follow-up actions, then, but you have noted some of the commitments, Clerk. I'm sure that there's a significant pieces of information
to come back.
that you come back to. Okay, members, we'll take a 5-minute break there and then we'll get into our next section.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Extra strong. Must like hot stuff.
Oh, I love them.
No?
No, I'm okay. I'm coughing
Passing
enough.
around everybody else, you
Make me
wouldn't hear.
worse.
She confirmed open.
Okay, so that's us back into open session, members, and we are resuming at agenda item 7, which is quarterly financial update, and we're taking an oral briefing today from the Department for Communities officials. The briefing paper for the agenda item is page 3 of the table papers, and was previously agenda item 5 in our running order. The committee team have also provided again the EQAA document, which the finance briefing paper referred to for members' information, and that can be found starting at page 20 of your table pack. I'd now like to welcome the following department officials alongside John, who we've already been engaging with there. So we're joined now by Cathy Sands, who's the Finance Director, and Olga Beagon, who is Finance Director. And John, could I invite you to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Yeah. Despite Cathy's protestations, I'll make this brief. So today we're going to talk about essentially where we got to in closing the last financial year, and also the draft budget allocations for the 26 to 30 allocations. Unfortunately, members, you'll be aware there's been no significant or material changes since we were last at the committee with regard to the future year's budget position. In terms of the 25-26 closing position, the department finished out in the last financial year with 930 million of resource DEL, 272.9 million of capital DEL, and 31.4 million of financial transactions capital. The department was assisted in achieving those numbers with a number of successful monitoring rounds that allowed additional funding for disabled adaptations, social development housing programme, and so on and so forth. It was still a very challenging budget year with almost circa 190 million budget pressure on the revenue side going in to the year. Similar on the capital side, where Minister took the decision to dedicate over 70% of his discretionary capital to social housing to get close to delivering the PFG targets in the year. In terms of the draft 26-30 budget, we received the outworkings of the comprehensive spending review, which shaped the draft budget. That was provided to officials on the 19th of December. Minister for Finance released a public consultation which closed on the 3rd of March. Frankly, like all departments, we have a significant concern over the allocations that are in there, and like Minister did in the last year, he will have difficult decisions. In the last financial year, Minister only prioritised critical vacancies, did not do essentially a number of programmes that would have been considered net new, and he did that to secure funding to continue programmes that help those that are the most vulnerable in our society. But moving into the next set of financial years that are in the draft budget, so for 26-27 on the revenue side, the draft budget provided baseline plus 10, so 764 million, 27-28, 754 plus 26.5, which is 781 million, and in the final year of the spending review, 783.8 million. It is, following our analysis, it is our view that the department would struggle to maintain a balanced budget if that budget maintains. And when I say that cautiously, saying that is if there are decisions that only maintain the standstill of what the budget is currently doing. Typically, the department will face inflationary pressures which are not accounted for in this budget, of some £32 million, made up of a range of inflation, GAE and salaries and so on, and salaries for our ALBs. So if I come to the specifics of that, that means the current allocation as provided in the next financial year, if it is approved, the department would face 40 million of in-year pressure on the revenue side. And again, I must stress, that's 40 million without doing anything new. If I move on to the capital position, while the 26-27 draft position represents an increase on 25 by 26, it remains significantly below the level to fund the department's inescapable capital commitments and the executive's programme for government commitments. In particular, while the proposed RRI funding for SDHP, that's the housing programme, is welcomed, the majority of this funding is required to meet existing contractual commitments, leaving very limited scope. So essentially, the social housing programme and PFG commitment requires some 440 million for new starts going forward. That is currently not funded. If we look at the year ahead, and Cathy, I'll look to you for help here. So we have 107 million ring fenced for housing, and we have a contractual tail of some 104 million. So you can see there's only 3 million left for new starts, where the requirement to meet the PFG commitment in the next financial year is something like 115 million. So obviously that would require the Minister to dedicate all of his discretionary expenditure in his capital budget towards housing, and I must stress that comes at things like maintaining our heritage assets, maintaining our facilities, so on and so forth. So capital, like revenue, the Minister will face some very difficult decisions. So just to again be precise in that, when we combine inescapable and high priority capital requirements and they are considered together, the department faces a capital shortfall of some 132.4 million, and that rises to 288 million in 29-30. Draft earmarked capital allocations in the draft budget have largely been met in full. In terms of FTC, it is better news. with a small shortfall of 2.9 million in the last year of the draft budget, which we would expect that we could manage that through the budget process across the years. So I guess I feel like the bearer of bad news every time I come here. The draft budget, as it sits for every department, provides very stark choices, highlights the need for all ministers, executive ministers, to make some difficult decisions alongside significant transformation in how we deliver public services, something that we talked about when Grainia and I were at the seat just a few moments ago. We are, as always, at the behest of the committee and happy to answer any questions. I would say no decisions have been made on future years' budgets because the budgets are only draft. Officials are looking at the numbers in the draft budget and working through a number of savings scenarios of how we may get to a point where we have confidence about delivering a balanced budget. I can commit to you here today that all of those analyses have lived by certain principles, and those principles are minimising the impact on citizens at all costs, maintaining essential services, maintaining essential programmes, continuing to deliver impact as much as possible, and also importantly for those delivery partners and our ALBs that we are taking the majority of the pain where it is possible and providing them with the financial agency that they need to continue to deliver on the department's behalf. But undoubtedly, if the draft budget maintains, it will have an impact on how the department is able to deliver the services it currently does.
Okay, thank you, John. And I have to say we're acutely aware of financial pressures on all departments, including the Department for Communities. And I'd like to get maybe a sense of the immediate pressure facing the department. You've identified a pressure of 174.4 of ring-fenced resource DEL in 2026-27, rising to 244.5 by 28-29. That's a huge increase of 70 million over 3 years. Can you break that down for us in terms of how much of that's due to pay increases or what other reasons are driving that 70 million increase?
I suppose I'll refer you probably to you have a table 3 in your briefing which lays out sort of where the pressures are coming from, and it breaks it down right across the raft of DFC pay, the homelessness intervention, supporting people, etc. So it's driven by a variety of things which we put the bids in, and the increases year on year are contained within that as well. So for example, for pay we had a need of about 31 million, which was 26 for the department, and then about 4.5 million for ALBs, and it then increases year on year, going up to 44 million and then 57. And that is on the basis of estimates of indicative sort of pay and progression percentages that are given to us at a global level by DOF to use in this scenario analysis.
So in light of that, who within the department then is ultimately responsible or accountable for prioritisation decisions? Because obviously the overall budget is poor, but there's also a budget within which certain decisions are being made and will have to be made. So in terms of where programmes are going to be scaled back or ceased, who makes that decision and what criteria is going to be applied?
So that's the Minister's decision to make. It is the accounting officer and the accounting officer's officials to ensure any decisions are made in a way that is compliant with the relevant legislation and statutory obligations, as well as the relevant governance and insurance frameworks. We have had 2 meetings with the Minister to discuss various scenarios on the draft budget. We have spoke to him about the principles that we think should be adopted, which is the prioritisation of protecting essential services, minimising the impact of citizens and so on. We have had no instruction from Minister to deviate from that, and that has been the building of our savings scenarios. Now, we are still in the process of awaiting what the final number will be. Because there is 2 scenarios at play. The current draft budget is agreed at some stage, or in fact the draft budget is not agreed, and then we move to DOF through the legislation setting a budget which would set it at 95% of last year's baseline, which on the revenue side equates to something around 720 million when you take out the earmarked piece. which obviously would increase the departmental pressures that are currently sitting at approximately 40 million to some 70 million.
Okay, and what specific services or programmes are most at risk of reduction or cessation under the projected resource DEL shortfalls?
Chair, I would say they're all at risk. So what we're trying to do is minimise stopping or ceasing services at all, but where it's possible, understanding where we can possibly save money, or where we can possibly look at the efficacy of programmes. So right across the board, in some cases, it's maintenance. It's not providing any more money. In other instances, now that's difficult because sometimes we will be not providing additional money that is in respect of delivery partners having to make pay awards and so on, inflationary pressures. In other instances where we know that there's a programme that perhaps could withstand certain cuts, that's what we're looking at. So, but there's no exact science in this, and these are all subject to ministerial approval at this stage. So I think it would be remiss of me at this stage to go into specifics on that.
Okay, I'm going to go firstly to our Deputy Chair and then I'm coming to Kelly. So, Kathy.
Thanks, Chair. And John, I'll be honest, every time you say Kathy, I'll look to you for help. My heart goes because I'm like, don't be looking to me for help.
Sorry.
Well, just one thing I wanted to point out, and look, I know there's a difference between revenue and capital and all that, but you mentioned a number there. I think one of the pressures is 40 million, and I don't think it's going unnoticed that that's the exact figure that's going to the Ulster Folk Museum. And we think of all the pressures that you're talking about here. There's just a serious question over prioritisation here. And look, I know that it's the Minister's priorities. What I want to ask is, John, the last time you were here, not today, the last time I was asking you questions just about the prioritisation and money that the department was spending on various projects. Now, I was pointing out at the time about hundreds of thousands of pounds being spent on X, Y and Z projects. And I asked you specifically on the money spent on the Queen's Parade in Bangor. Mm-hmm. Now, you said to me at the time that it was fully financed by City Deals money. So, and you can actually go and check it in social media. You'll see it on there. So, in a written response to a question to the department, my department has invested over £10 million on that project. Can you clear that up? Is it nothing or is it £10 million?
Oh, and I apologise. That was I misspoke there. So City Deal monies are ring fenced, and City Deal monies come from a tripartite of investment partners, with some money coming centrally from UK government, some money coming from local government sources, and money coming from NI executive department sources, and it's all ring fenced. Yeah, so when the City Deal was agreed, the Belfast City Region deal was agreed, the proportion of funding from the department for that project was set ring fence. So yes, you're absolutely correct, and that was my error that there was 10 million. So I apologise for that.
No, that's okay. I think it's quite concerning that when we were asking, was specifically a finance briefing, that like £10 million is quite a sum of money, to seem to have sort of went astray there. So you can see why there was confusion over that. Just on that, the Belfast City deals, why is there any money going to any other of the projects from the department, or is it just this one particular project?
No, the department will make a contribution across all the projects in the City Deal.
Okay, is there
because we have the policy area for regeneration, and all the projects that have a regeneration impact will come from DFC.
So for example, I know, and being parochial here, in Newry Morning Down City Deal project, do you know what the breakdown is of what Department of Communities are contributing there?
I don't actually have it at hand, Kathy, but I can get it for you in terms of a further breakdown and the specifics of the City Deals.
Okay. And Kathy, just for clarity, I did misspeak, but the operational reality is the City Deal money, because it's ring fenced. We have a governance control of the money is deployed in, but if the money is not deployed into the City Deal, we can't take it somewhere else. So the money is not in play for us. So in the situation where
£10 is not in play for...
No, that £10 million is kept sitting against that. So we can't redeploy any of the City Deals money to another to relieve a pressure.
Okay, thanks, Chair, for that.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, guys. I know you've talked about the department taking the majority of pain. I think there's a lot of others that are sharing that pain with you, including the community and voluntary sector. I don't know whether they're up or down at the moment, but there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, and the chair's already mentioned that. It was page 5 of 17 of your papers for us. It's page 7, the top paragraph, when it talked about investment in certain areas was made possible only through prioritisation, the cessation of deferral of lower priority activity. I appreciate that that's a decision that's taken probably by the Minister. Whenever there is the opportunity to share that with us, it would be really useful to see how that has been considered and what those lower priority areas are. The other thing I wanted to ask about then is, has there been a reduction in pressures because move to UC is basically done now? So that's the big programme of work has happened. So has there been anything that has alleviated for yourselves budget-wise because of that?
UC. So yes, obviously the move to UC was completed then in March. So we, as we've discussed then, have still a lot of vacancies in the benefit operational area, and we are still not able to deliver the full intent of UC policy. So I mean, there's still a lot of pressure there. I mean, currently only approximately 20 to 30% are getting the full work coach support that they need just because of resource. So yes, as going forward, there may be less pressure, but it's still not going to alleviate all the pressure that there is, certainly.
I was just wondering if there was any opportunity to actually maybe help with some of those people who had been processing the universal credit claims, to maybe move into helping Capita get a move on, because PIP is now currently sitting at over a year in processing some applications and some reviews. So it's becoming quite difficult in constituency offices when you hear that. The other thing I want to ask is table 4, and it's our page 13. Can you clarify what the additional general capital is and what the complementary fund is, please?
Okay, so in terms of the additional general of 5 is what you're referring to, Kelly?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So essentially that is just how the paper is set out. We've been given a general allocation of 155 and essentially a proposed 5. So Minister will have 160 million in his allocation if that draft budget stays the way that it is.
And because it's called additional general, is that for use for anything, or is that already
general? It's not specific. So then the specific ones is in the table beneath, which gives you the RRI, and you will note in 2 future years, 28-9 and 29-30, we have an additional sort of amount which is specifically for social housing.
Okay. And that complementary fund.
And then the complementary fund, and that's where I'm going to look to my notes, and I'm going to hope I can bring it to my to hand.
So, if I could, so the complementary fund is a further funding programme on top of the city deals of some 105 million. So again, it works similar to the city deals, where if a project or programme is approved for funding through the complementary fund, it is funded through a tripartite arrangement. Okay. So that's ring fenced against those pre-agreed projects.
So the complementary fund, it's accounted for. The additional general, it just feels a wee bit like a slush fund. If we're so tight with our budgets, how do we have anything in additional general?
So this is what came to us in the draft budget.
Okay.
And when we first seen it, to be honest with you, we were going, why isn't it just all one? But that's the way it was stated to us. But it essentially is just an additional general allocation. And if I could just come back on the UC piece, if I may. So there was quite a significant piece of work as the programme came to an end, moved to UC programme to an end to redeploy those staff. There are obviously ongoing pressures that actually move from the department, because as people move from UC, then in terms of rates relief, then they receive that from LPS, which is Department of Finance, rather than ourselves.
Okay. Although rates relief will only apply to some, not all of the recipients. Yeah. It's just that all PIP applications are taking far too long at the moment.
And if I could, we actually had a meeting. I had a meeting with Capital last week on that, and there's a rectification plan being put in place to try and address that. So it is something that the department are are chasing very hard on.
Yeah, good, because I dealt with another family last night who have been waiting for their review for over 4 months, and there is a palpable fear there that they're going to lose everything, but we're just waiting on the review. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the housing supply scheme. Now, we know that the housing supply scheme, we're not hitting the targets in the housing supply scheme, and that's for many reasons. Massive reason is Northern Ireland Water, because they're doing closed capture areas all over the place that overlap with housing supply scheme areas of importance. If there's any slippage in that, is there any potential to, once the budget is known, to reinvest something into supporting people, because they're carrying the weight of the pressure of people still being homeless?
So if I think your question is, if there's slippage in the social development housing programme as a result of constraints in water infrastructure, could it be redeployed to supporting people? So my understanding of supporting people is largely revenue. And it's over 80 million, whereas social development housing programme is all capital, so we couldn't redeploy that money for supporting people.
That can't be asked either, because it's just, I know in my area there's already been housing schemes have been turned down because of Northern Ireland Water, but
I will say, Kelly, that in terms of when we deploy the capital to the housing executive and the housing executive then deploy it on the housing associations, we monitor that extremely closely. Cathy's team are up to the 30th of March and 31st of March monitoring that very closely for slippage, so it's very well managed, and in my time in the department I have never seen significant slippage come out of that.
Okay. The only thing I'm worried about is we will end up building houses where the most priority isn't, because Northern Ireland Water don't have a problem there. So I'm just concerned that we will end up putting houses in the wrong places. Every house is good, to be honest. The other thing then is, so community and voluntary sector, through whatever way they get their money out of Department for Communities, and it may be an ALB, currently have funding up until the end of June. Again, this is a lot of people heading for redundancy. Having to dip into reserves is against their charity rules, and they need those reserves if they're going to have to pay people on. When will they know their next funding quarter?
The department received initial guidance from the Department of Finance on Wednesday evening, setting out the steps that would need to be taken if a budget is not agreed. Part of those steps is the department then provides each department with an allocation of budget that allows us then to engage with Minister to deploy that money. Part of that would be an allocation for voluntary community sector. Okay. So in any situation, we're coming to the stage in probably the next week or so where we will have to agree with the Minister another set of interim allocations that are either based on a DOF allocation that is due to come, or an allocation that is based on the control vote that is bound in the Budget Act of 2026.
Will that come along with a notice that there's nothing more coming? It's just because I worked in the community and voluntary sector, to be honest, I was sick to the back teeth every year of having this. It would be good to have some sort of confidence for those organisations.
So, yes, and obviously we would very much be in that space, and we work very closely to understand how we can alleviate the particular technical barriers and statutory barriers that they will come up against in this situation. I don't see a situation where they won't be provided some surety, whether that's through a budget for the executive or a budget through some other means.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But it won't be, as I've said consistently, the budget won't be what everybody would hope it is.
Some of the solutions, I'm just thinking, if it all goes terrible, debt advice, independent advice sector, great job, make the call, great job, duplication. Has there been a review, or is there any review to see what would be the cheaper way to deliver that?
So I would need to consult with a relevant policy colleague, but I'm happy to take that away and get something back to you in writing with regard to ask the question if there's a review planned or ongoing.
Wonderful, thank you.
Manisha, all right.
A fáilte over East, John. You're welcome again, John. Agus fair in the fáilte of Olga, agus Cathy, and a very hearty welcome to Olga and Cathy. I have just one single question in a sense, and it's in relation to the Policeman project and the very fact that it seems to be that it might be under pressure, that it could be withdrawn quite likely, or maybe there'd be no funding provided to it. Could you maybe develop that for me, just how much is actually allocated to that project at present, and is it likely that they will not continue to fund that project?
Right, I'm going to have to come back to you on the place names ones to get the detail from the officials within the department that would be looking after it. I don't have that at hand.
Okay, so if I could, Chair posed the same question. So I suspect and I hope what has happened is they have been given an interim allocation, as all funded partners have been, for the first quarter, because we don't have a budget. Anything after that will be for a decision subject to what the Minister deems a priority. But if you're content, we'll provide that in writing to you to provide absolute clarity that this is an interim allocation pending a budget, and no decision has been made on any programmes or priorities at this stage for the next financial year that we're currently in.
Might it be the case that the low-hanging fruit, as they would say, whenever it comes to the department looking to save money or allocate money to other pet projects?
These are all decisions for the Minister.
Thank you. And you'd mentioned there within, sorry, I'll go to Sean first and I'll come back then to my follow-up. Sean, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just realised my camera was off there, Chair. Yeah, it's just around welfare. So I'll need to read these off just because of the numbers. The executive recognised an additional 16.9 million of benefit delivery funding. The draft multi-year budget only recognises 8 million, or only provides 8 million per year. So I was just wondering if you can explain why the allocation dropped so significantly when the department's assessed requirement is 23.9 for 26-27 and then 34.8 by 28-29. And what would that funding gap mean then in practice for claimants? Is that something that we should be very concerned about? Because given those who receive those benefits are those who are already under financial pressure for the most part. So I'm just wondering about that. And then the other thing is just it's my big concern around all of the budget, and I know John in the last session I asked about it, the underfunding of benefit delivery in terms of the crisis support, the discretionary support. Has any modelling been done in terms of the knock-on impact of any reduction in that crisis support? Has any modelling or any assessment been done around that?
So, Shauna, if I take the first one first. So, the 16.9 was a bid that was put to DOF in the last financial year to fund 400 posts in benefit delivery. Due to delays with recruitment, we could only spend 8 million of that. So in December, we returned 8 million of that unspent money to DOF. Now, we have subsequently then recruited into those posts. So we're incurring those costs and will continue to incur those costs. Hence why you see the bids for this current financial year and the future financial years. So in short, that is going to land on the department as a pressure. And when we began a negotiation with the Department of Finance, we were very welcoming of the 16.9 million, but also we were very careful to flag to the Department of Finance that normally when a provision is made for staffing, it would be a recurrent provision because staff obviously need paid every year, but this wasn't recurrent. So what they have done is reduce that to 8 million across the draft budget. So to answer your question, that lands with us as part of our overall pressures. Now we have recruited into those posts, but I must stress what Olga touched upon earlier. We are still not living up to policy parity. So we are still delivering benefits, but we're not delivering real deep employment support to help people go on a journey. And that is deeply concerning for the department. In terms of the assessment of crisis and advice services for those people that find themselves in financial crisis and difficulty and so on, that impact is not taking place right now, but we stand ready when decisions are made to understand that and when decisions are being considered. We have an analytics team who are very skilled and obviously they have a great deal of data around benefit delivery, poverty and so on. So we can do a very strong assessment of the impact that will have.
Okay, and then whenever you're talking about the maintaining parity and welfare delivery, you've mentioned there around the job coaches, that is one element that we're not. Is that the only element that we're not maintaining parity in? And what does that look like in practical terms? Are there any other areas of parity that are most at risk then with this budget?
Yeah, so and in terms of the specifics, I will lean on Olga here, but at a high level, so recent bills that have went through Westminster in terms of getting Britain back to work and so on have had a very significant provision that went to DWP for them to invest in job coaches to provide that rich level of support. But they also provided funding that would ultimately go into the voluntary and community and advice sector to help people go on a journey. And those numbers, I think, are in the 800 to £1 billion range. None of that money via Barnett hypotheticals as came to the department. So, so our employment support provision over the last number of years has consistently went down and down and down. Last year, the minister took a decision to fund Job Start. The year before, Job Start was funded by money from the Northern Ireland office and so on. All of the budget pressures that I've laid out make these discretionary decisions that the minister may take more difficult because the pressure is greater.
And does that link in as well then, obviously, with the British government putting in place changes to welfare support and looking at that unemployment? We know that a lot of those supports weren't going to be directly funded, unlike England and Wales, by the government. The likes of the right to try and all of that kind of thing. Is that now absolutely put on hold? And does that put us in an even worse position, I suppose, as on a baseline for those trying to get those people back into work?
Sorry, Shauna, I think if I understand your question, if you're referring to the proposed green paper,
yeah,
and the delay in that, yes, that is all subject obviously to the outworkings of the TIMS review, yeah, which will then the ramifications of which will be considered by the department. But whether or not that has added additional pressure to the department, speaking frankly, no. Because historically, despite what the legislative position has been in Westminster, we have not received the Barnett consequential from that, because that comes unhypothecated and then has not came to the department. So even within the current legislative environment, there is a number of significant funding programmes that have been part of legislation that have then not been realised by the department here.
I think that's my concern, John, is when we look at the position that we're in, that it looks very unlikely that we will ever be in a position, at least in the next couple of financial cycles, to actually provide that support. So when we're looking at potentially reducing support on one hand, we're not actually given we're not in a position to give the like-for-like support to actually either get people into a job, maintain a job, and then therefore reduce the amount that's going out in terms of the welfare. That, I suppose that's where my concern is when I look at that budget, that there's no room for further support. That's what it's saying to me quite clearly.
Okay, thank you, Sian. And just actually picking up on that question of Sian's, how will the department ensure continued compliance with equality duties if programme supporting vulnerable groups is reduced?
Well, Chair, as we do, we will be doing equality impact assessments on our budget. And when we get that done, obviously we will look to put a suitable mitigation so those impacts do not manifest.
Okay, and the final one for me, you'd mentioned that within a couple of weeks you're going to be making recommendations to the Minister on funding decisions. When can committee see those?
As soon as those decisions are made, I'm obviously more than happy to come back to committee and give a full briefing to the committee on those.
Including the recommendations as well as the decisions?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Thank you. Members, okay, thank you, John, Olga and Kathy. Appreciate your briefing. Very, very worrying situation, I have to say, and we haven't even touched on much of it there, but we will continue to want to work with you and appreciate you coming to committee regularly to update us. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And apologies again, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so members, I'll just check if there's any further action or comment anybody wants to make. Kathy?
Yeah, it would just be, sorry, on the city deals part. I know Kathy had mentioned she just didn't have the detail there around the breakdown of all of the projects, because there are major projects that are coming right across the board, so it would be great to see just the level of investment from the department in those.
In relation to the city deal investment, a breakdown of the projects by area?
Yeah, the money coming from communities, not the ring fence city deals money.
Not the city deal money. Communities money, okay.
Just to the chair.
Sorry. Members agreed with that?
Agreed.
Content with that? Yeah, please.
Hopefully we get feedback as well too on the place names project as well.
Yeah,
and whether or not they intend to continue to fund that particular project, because I think it's something that's very, very important.
Yeah,
I had a list of the interim allocations going to the community and voluntary sector programmes. Is that was unfit of your request?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would that cover it? Okay.
Well, hopefully, if it's included in it.
Yeah, but also in the earlier session and this session, John has committed to coming back to us with further. They weren't 100% clear as to what the situation was there, and I would like some clarity on that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other actions, members, or otherwise content for now?
Can I just say that one that I was asking about, the additional general capital slush fund? Can we maybe write to the Minister to say that we would prefer to see that allocated as opposed to being under a line that says general?
Yeah, I'd be content. I think there's so many pressures there. There's obviously housing pressures, anti-poverty strategy. We don't see any budget line yet.
It will depend what the department actually gets in their budget. It may not even be there anymore, but it's just rather than having a line that just says additional general.
Yeah.
That's.
We'd be keen to ensure that all resources available are being deployed.
Yeah.
I also had a definition of what are the lower priority areas.
Yeah, well, they probably won't give us that until, as the chair has said, you know, that the decisions and the prioritisation is provided to us at that stage. Yeah.
Or is committee content that I wrap all of those up into one letter, following up on the finance briefing?
Yeah.
Members content? Yeah. Okay, and you're content, Clerk, with you of the detail of it. Okay, members, thank you. And moving on to agenda item 10 then, correspondence. So, unlike matters arising with the amount of these, I'll propose that we work through them in bundles, and I'll draw attention to certain items I think members would want to look at, and I'd also ask then if you want to draw out any particular items. So we're starting with the memo on page 96 of the pack. The first bundle is covering items 10.2 to 10.8. The first item I want to draw out, and that is 10.6, is correspondence from housing rights, with a discussion paper that explores options for developing proposals for statutory duty to prevent homelessness. Here, housing rights have offered to provide an oral briefing to the committee if members would find it useful. Would members wish to schedule a briefing? Yeah, I agree. I think that would be very useful. Yes, Kelly, go ahead.
Just on another item of correspondence.
Yeah, are you 10.2 to 10.8?
It's 10.2, yeah. It's just on the youth assembly involvement. I know we've had them in education committee and they are absolutely amazing, and I just think there's so much going on in this committee that impacts them directly. The anti-poverty strategy, Irish language strategy, those diversity and inclusion strategies. There's so much that I know that we could get a lot of good feedback from them. They, just thinking back, the school uniforms bill, they were fantastic and brought forward so many really good ideas for that. I think it would be really, really welcome to hear from them, and I know how keen they are to try and aid committees as well. So I think it'd be great to get them in, if that's.
And we've had them in on the pensions, on some of the pensions regulations.
Specific items before, but are we proposing to have them in terms of the community's remit?
I think so, yeah, because I think they would have quite a lot to offer. I know there'd be certain things I would really like to tease out with them.
Yeah, and they are fantastic, well prepared and focused, and a really important perspective. So I would agree. Are members content?
I'm just wondering, will
Chair, sorry, that was the point that I wanted to come in on as well, if possible.
Okay, go ahead, Sean. Yeah, before we come to
10.2. So Kathy had gotten in just there ahead of me. This was discussed at the all-party group for youth participation on Monday, and they have done a survey, and 62% of respondents to that survey said they felt they weren't listened to by politicians. And so I think that there is definitely a space. We only ever seem to consult with young people when it's very specific, whether it's the school uniforms bill or vaping that we think is more aligned to young people. But actually, there are so many issues that they have opinions on, whether they're deemed youth adjacent or otherwise. So I do think that there is definite merit in getting the Youth Assembly in, and potentially members of the all-party group for youth participation as well, because that group that come together are made up of young people from VOIPIC, loads of different organisations, Northern Youth Forum. So moving past consultations to actually be asking, what do you want us to focus on, and things like that, I think would be absolutely brilliant. So I would really encourage the committee to use. We have that amazing resource for young people at our behest. So I think that would be a really great way to try and link up, and a one-off briefing to start with, I think would be really useful.
Yep. Yeah, and it's also notable that it's a newly elected or selected group, so it'll be useful to hear that, Kelly.
Just say that my only concern is it's exam time, and we meet on a Thursday morning, so we'll maybe need to push that to very close to the summer recess for them, because I know that there was complaints elsewhere that they were being asked to go to meetings during exams. Yeah. Or
indeed, if it can't be fitted in there, indeed maybe even after the recess. But I think that's a valid point.
No, we want to get the best out of them without them being under pressure.
From what I know of their attendance, they will prepare rigorously, sometimes better than some of the official receipts. So they will put in significant work. So it may be the case that may need to be to give them the best opportunity at it. We may need to push that to that sort of time frame. But yes, great idea, and I fully agree. Thank you. Okay, members, anything else within 10.2 to 10.8?
10.6.
Yep, go ahead, Melissa.
And that the Assembly Accounts Committee recommend the Department of Community should bring forward proposals to the statute duty to prevent homelessness. This is welcomed by Housing Rights, and their discussion paper held.
We've already agreed to bring them in, Melissa.
Oh, have you?
Yes, we've already agreed to bring them in. I dealt with that one.
Very good.
Thank you. Okay, 10.2 to 10.8, okay. So moving then to 10.9 to 10.15, I wanted to draw out item 10.10, which is correspondence from the department setting out details of its delegated legislation programme. The table attached appears to run up to January 2027, just to draw it to members' attention. Item 10.14 is correspondence from the Equality Coalition, in relation to the draft anti-poverty strategy consultation report and its implications for the forthcoming strategy and action plan. And that is a good report in the sense that it seems to be very comprehensive. I've had a look at it. They have requested to brief the committee jointly with the Anti-Poverty Network and the Anti-Poverty Strategy Group. Would members be content that we schedule a joint briefing? Yep, Kelly, go ahead.
I would absolutely be content. The question I would like to ask them before they come to see us is what reaction have they had directly from the department? Because sometimes when groups come to us, they think that we can have that, control over consultations, but it just, as part of their presentation, I would like to hear from them what discussions they've also had directly with the department.
Okay.
Members content with that? Thank you. 10.15 is correspondence with the Committee for Finance seeking views on all Assembly statutory committees on the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill. Our response has been requested by Tuesday, June 9th. Are members content for the committee team to review the bill for intersection with DFC areas of responsibility and draft a committee response for consideration if appropriate?
Absolutely.
Content, thank you. Okay, anything else, members, in that 10.9 to 10.15? Otherwise content with the memo? Yep, thank you. Moving then to the final bundle of the main pack, which is 10.16 to 10.22. The item I wanted to draw out there was a correspondence from the department at 10.16 regarding a correction to information provided during the Charities Amendment Bill pre-introductory briefing on 26th of March. We were advised at that occasion that the regulations will be subject to draft affirmative procedure, but the accounts and reports regulations will actually be subject to negative resolution procedure. Item 10.9 is a request from the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals to sponsor an event on the 3rd of November here in Parliament Buildings on libraries deliver impact, outcomes and value for communities. They've also requested that as chair of this committee I attend and open the event, and that the invitation is extended to all members of this committee. So first of all, can I ask members for any comments, or are you content that I sponsor this event? And can I tell you before I go to ask you that I absolutely love libraries and what they do, so please say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, members content, thank you. And members, I'm really looking forward to that event. I actually think that'll be a really good one. Any other comments members wish to make?
Is that National Libraries Week? Remember we had talked about doing something about that?
Yeah, no, it's a couple of weeks before.
Oh, okay.
And we have already planned for something for Libraries Week. Yeah.
So it'll tee us up nicely for our that important National Libraries Week. So thank you, members. Anything else, members, in relation to 10.16 to 10.22? And if not, then so content with the memo as outlined, along with the recommendations we made within this session. I'm moving then to table papers, and we have a correspondence memo, page 186. With further items of correspondence going from 10.24 to 10.28. I can take those therefore as one bundle. I wanted to draw out item 10.27 is correspondence to the Minister regarding a written statement issued to the Assembly yesterday on the extension of the debt respite breathing space scheme. Just to inform you, members, that we will be receiving a briefing on this statutory instrument from the Department at next week's meeting. And item 10.28, members, I have received an invitation from Cricket Ireland to attend the Ireland versus New Zealand Test match, which is taking place here at Stormont Cricket Ground on the 27th of May. On behalf of the committee, would members be content that I attend that event?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Hope it's not too sunny.
You're back. That's good, yeah. Thank you, members. I've actually really enjoyed engagement with that. I think there's really good initiatives being taken out by Cricket Ireland there, and we've seen the value of some of them, so I appreciate that. And I'll feed back to members, of course, on both those events. So, anything else members wish to draw out in the table papers, correspondence? Members otherwise content, as per the memo. Agenda item 11, the forward work programme, and members, a copy of the forward work programme is at page 383. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme?
Yep.
Okay, members, just to advise you that as next Monday, the 4th, is a bank holiday, the committee team will issue the meeting pack tomorrow, Friday 1st, for our next meeting on Thursday 7th. So that pack will be out to you there. Any other business, members? There's just something that occurred to me. We had agreed that I would raise in PIC that issue about pool budgets and the potential, or maybe the need to mandate that. I actually think it would be better if we wrote to the PIC committee, and I'll pick it up based on that. I think it's just more structurally stronger if we do it in that way.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Thank you, members. Okay then, members, date, time and location of the next... Yes, go ahead,
just to say, if we look in the forward work programme, we commence on the 1st of June. Just to let everyone know, the all-party group on homelessness is meeting on the 2nd of June at lunchtime, and the Minister's attending.
Okay, thank you for that, Kelly.
Anybody wants to come and hear that one?
Thank you. So members, our next meeting will be 10 a.m. on Thursday 7th of May here in room 29 in Parliament Buildings. Thank you very much, and we'll just wait for broadcasting then to be ended. Clerk, please.
Committee room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound.